Yeah, can everybody get their video up there?
Yeah, I'm connecting right now, Barb.
No problem. Thank you very much. Yes, we can start.
Recording in progress. So I am calling to order the June 14th, 2021 Operations Work Group meeting. The first order of business tonight is public comment. We did not receive any written statements. Barb, we have one registered speaker?
Yes.
Recording in progress.
Her name is Susana Alvarez. I'm letting her in now. Oh, the new student, Nama Candy, is starting tonight. So after the public appearance, if you want to introduce her. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Susana is there.
Susana, whenever you're ready to speak, we're ready. Susana,
Yes?
are you ready to speak? We're ready for you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
All right, then here I go. I'm going to start now. Tonight, you will hear a proposal for training new teacher mentors, and here's my plea to you. Good evening. My name is Susana Alvarez. I am originally from Venezuela. I came to medicine in 2010, and I have been a teacher in MMSD for 9 years. Due to my bicultural upbringing, my mother was from Wisconsin and my dad from Venezuela. I taught in Venezuela for many years before I had to leave the country due to political turmoil. When I was hired to teach third grade DLI at Leopold Elementary School in August of 2012, I registered at Edgewood College. DPI would allow me to teach under a provisional and emergency license due to the high demand for bilingual teachers, while I completed the classes that would certify me as a highly qualified teacher in MMSD. I was not given a mentor because I came from Venezuela with teaching experience. I am here to tell you that my first years at Leopold were the hardest years of my life. And when I say that, I am able to compare the experience to uprooting my family from their home country of Venezuela and running from a dictatorship that did not guarantee my family's safety. I left behind a way of life to start from scratch, and I felt I could navigate and captain that ship. My prior knowledge told me that we would be all right because I was able to make inferences based on what I had already learned. Some of the things that did not allow me to sleep at night for over a year were the following: IC, IEP, ELL, ESL, GRR, Lucy Calkins, CC, CD, LD, ADHD, DLI, PTOT, AVID, RSG, and so many others. I was teaching in the classroom before I set foot in my first class at Edgewood. And in Venezuela, we did not have any of this. I learned the way I learned English when I came to live here in 1980, the sink or swim way. It is an effective way to learn. You do learn. It is also very traumatic. Teaching is a very complex art to master. In DLI, I have worked with many teachers that come with a life story that is very similar to mine. They come with experience from other countries, or they are just beginning their journey in teaching. We need teacher mentors in all our schools because all of our schools have first and second year teachers working in them. These teachers need to focus on making their learning environments optimal. And the role of a teacher mentor is to help them to figure out what that looks like and feels like and sounds like. This is an equity issue. It is as simple as that. This program is essential for new teachers. They have a right to the scaffold. It is the right thing to do, and I encourage you to pass the proposal for training new teacher mentors into the budget. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Susana. Wait, is that all?
Yes,
public speakers?
that was non-speaker, yes.
All right, we are delaying the approval of minutes, so we're gonna move on to the agenda. Tonight is our final meeting before we vote on the draft preliminary budget on June 28th. And as a result, we have a packed agenda tonight. We are talking about proposed changes to our funds transfer policy, which is policy 6061. We're going to get a facilities update, which is focused on the use of TID 25 funds and high school fundraising plans. And we're going to get a budget presentation, which is focused on state budget development, incorporating public feedback into the draft preliminary budget, and federal ESSER funding. So on top of that, we have a closed session after our operations work group meeting tonight. My goal for tonight is to facilitate an efficient meeting that provides board members with the time necessary for the questions and discussions needed before we make our budget vote. With that in mind, I have a couple of requests I'd just like to put out there. For board members, I'd like to encourage everyone to stay focused on getting the information that we need and having the discussions we need to have to make upcoming decisions. Before each agenda item, I will clarify what decisions will come out of what we're talking about, and I will also clarify what the pause points are in each agenda item for discussion and questions. I'm hoping that this will help us be more efficient. I also want to put out there that this doesn't prevent anyone from asking any question you want to ask that fits within how the meeting is legally noticed tonight. For the administration, I would ask that as much as possible, just try to have one team member respond to questions from the board. This doesn't preclude a couple of team members responding when a question is complicated or needs a couple of different points of view. Again, I'm just making these requests in order to respect everybody's time and try to end tonight's meeting at a reasonable hour. I think we all have the shared goal of sleep. So,
Chris, can you Nasa?
what was that?
Can we welcome the students?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Nama Pandy.
Yes.
Nama, can you turn your video on, your camera, please? Thank you.
Hi, Nama. I'd like to welcome our new student rep to the board, Nama Pandey. And Nama, would you like to say a few things?
Yeah, hi, my name's Nama. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm going to be a senior this fall at West High School. I'm super excited to represent MSD students and bring their voice to the table. I think their voice is super important, and I'm very excited to bring it to the table, so thank you.
Thank you, Nama. We're excited to have you join us. So, all right. Before we dig into tonight's agenda, I would like to propose a change in the order of business. Specifically, I am proposing to move the discussion of policy 6061 to the end of the agenda. I don't think we need to vote to change this order of business because this is a work group meeting, but I do want to ask, is anybody opposed to this change?
So you're moving item 4?
I'm moving item, I am moving item 4 to after 5 and 6. We'd start with 5, and then we do 6, and then we do 4.
And what was the rationale?
The rationale is twofold. First of all, we have a bunch of guests who are here for the facilities construction update. I'd like to respect their time and get them on the agenda first. And second, I don't want to get bogged down in the discussion of the policy when it's possible we won't actually be making that decision in June. So I'm trying to prioritize the June decision.
That makes a lot of sense. I support that.
Is there any opposition to that change?
I support the decision.
Okay.
I support that.
Hearing none, let's move forward with the facilities construction update. So there are two key decisions associated with the presentation we're about to have. The first decision is about the use of TID 25 funds for building projects, and these decisions are embedded into the vote we're going to take on the budget. The second is on June 28th, we're going to vote on fundraising plans for Capitol High and Follette. So with that in mind, we're going to have 4 pause points for questions and clarification during this discussion. The first one will be after the presentation of the Follette fundraising proposal. The second will be after the presentation of the Capitol High fundraising proposal. We're going to get updates on fundraising for Memorial West and what's going on at East. These updates are not associated with decisions, so we will consolidate all of those into one pause point, just if anyone has clarification or questions. And then finally, we will pause after the presentation about the Rimrock School, if anyone has questions about the use of TID 25 funds at that school. Are there any questions before we proceed? Dr. Jenkins, do you want to say any words to help us get grounded before we start?
Can you hear me well? Okay. Hey, just first of all, thanks, Chrissy, for how you're starting this meeting off, because we do have a lot on the agenda, but I want to say that we've been looking forward to this particular meeting in the operational work group as we have continued to focus our work on those strategic priorities that we have set for you have as a board, and we've been working together as a team to make sure that we're focusing on our early childhood and trying to make sure we get those full day 4K programs up. We're looking at other strategic priorities that we've talked about in our work to ensure that everything that we want to do in terms of moving the achievement forward, but also taking care of our students social, emotional, and mental health, adding the guidance counselors in and looking at what we're doing also with our psychologists. And so I'm going to be brief with my words tonight because I do want to keep us focused as you initially started out. And there'll be other opportunities for me to speak up, but I'm very proud of the work that we've done as a team. And Kelly, one more time, just thank you for your leadership of our team in the finance area as we've been trying to go through all of this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. I would like to invite the team to give our facilities presentation.
All right, thank you very much, Chris. Barb, if you would pull up our facility slides, and if I could invite Brandon Halverson up to join me in presenting tonight. And Nama, welcome on behalf of the senior leadership team here in the school district, welcome as well. So Barb will pull up the facility slides for us, and we'll start by looking at the outcomes for our time together. Chris had some very good opening comments. Our primary goals are to make sure you have the information you need to vote on the allotment of the TID 25 resources. We'll talk about the projects associated with them at La Follette, Cap High, and the Rimrock Road School. And we'll also talk, make sure you're ready for a vote on the La Follette fundraising plan. You'll hear from our school principals on the line there and our Cap High proposal as well. We do have all of our principals on tonight to help answer any of your questions and to share their excitement on this amazing work. So Barbara, if you could move on to the next slide here. Of course, we want to start off thanking our community. Today, we are talking about the $317 million set aside for the referendum. And after this, we'll be going into the budget, which is where our operational referendum funds really come into play. So many thanks to our community for allowing us to do this exciting work for our kids. And the next slide here, Barb. We have just a reminder what we're going to be looking at today. Our 4 main comprehensive high schools. Brandon will touch on the capital maintenance and the modernized learning needs. We'll go into Cap High, talk about those exciting changes happening over at the Hoyt School and our Rimrock Road School. As I mentioned, our objectives are on the next slide. We look forward to updating you on the timeline along with all the construction phase and the fundraising campaigns. So moving on into the next slide, we want to get into it as quick as possible, make sure we can hear from those principals. Before we dive in though, we want to remind everyone that we just completed and provided to you a report on over 60 meetings and thousands of voices post-referendum that have really absolutely impacted the work that Brandon here and our school principals are all doing to make sure that all of our facility projects are in line with the community vision. This is the summary slide that you saw back in April. The full report is on our website, but you will see themes throughout Brandon and our principals' talking points around welcoming and inviting spaces, racial and social justice, and sustainability. All of these are at the forefront of providing positive learning environments. We know our buildings are never enough. We know it takes great teachers and great staff and a wonderful curriculum, and all those things we'll be talking about through the budgeting process. But we also know that our buildings can be barriers to learning. And that's the work Brandon and our principals here will talk to you about today. So I'm going to hand this over to Brandon on the next slide to take us through. Go ahead, Brandon.
Okay, hello. Thanks for having us and taking the time. I want to just first recap. This slide should look familiar. This is our current schedule, and we are still on target for completion of Cap High and South Side in 2023, and then 2024 for East West La Follette Memorial. So I'm going to start we're going to touch on all 6 schools, and we'll start with the La Follette community. So, you can see with the staff and student input sessions, it provided us with priorities they'd like to see addressed in the design, such as improved wayfinding and welcome center arrangement, providing more natural light in the buildings, designed for neighborhood communities, and then creating distinct events entrance. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see these images should look new to you. So the front welcome center is developing further. You can see a very transparent entrance and welcoming. And then the lower right, you can see distinct entrances for the theater. And then further down is the athletic entrance. This artwork is certainly not part of the design, only as an indication that you could put some sort of artwork or mural at these locations. That's another thing we heard back from community staff and users. And so if you go to the next slide, this is an example of the spatial arrangement that the design team went through this exercise with all the La Follette user groups, the staff and the students. The design team here is highlighting the areas where adjacencies are of high priority and how they relate to the rest of the building. And that's how they're going to communicate it and give further feedback on how these arrangements work with the staff and students. Then on the next slide, I wanted to explain about the TID 25 scope proposal. So after our first round of design, our construction management team, Findorf, worked with our architects, EUA, and reviewed the schematic plan set and generated what we refer to as a buy-up list of items which staff and students asked for during programming above and beyond what we originally had in our referendum scope. This list has been evaluated with La Follette team, Devon and his team, and prioritized as to what would be most important to include. Some of the high priority items include enhanced finishes and common spaces, adding windows to provide more natural light into the building, adding elevator access to the second floor to the fitness areas, and then adding an orchestra pit and increased height of the stage scene fly space. And then a number of plumbing, electrical, and HVAC upgrades to support a more sanitary and healthy learning environment. So I'm going to turn it over to Devon, who will run through just an update of the La Follette fundraising plan and how these projects are going to benefit the student and staff.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate it. Just want to make sure you all can hear me. Perfect. Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate everyone's support and commitment on this. Many people have had a hand in just how this is shaking out for the students in the La Follette community. I'd say we couldn't have done any of this without Brandon and Mr. Hodo's team, like directing and guiding us, and EUA just being a partner in this work. Our project and fundraising plan we submitted, but essentially two groups will be supporting us, Board of Visitors and our Booster Club at La Follette, but not limited to just those two groups, but those are the two main groups that will be supporting us through the fundraising effort. And then what I'm going to talk about on the next two slides is a compilation of many hours of listening sessions that students and staff and community members helped us dream up. And so that's what I want to focus on. The biggest thing I want to say in terms of timeline is this is all iterative in a sense that the stuff that we place to be fundraised, we'll take it as soon as we're able to get it, but it's going to happen over a period of a couple of years. And we understand that it's iterative. And we prioritize the stuff that we need right now with the TID money. And so we'd be looking to fundraise something to the effect of $1.5 million. And like I said, it's an iterative process, and we prioritized our current needs with our TID money as well as the referendum money. Thank you. So things that we want to fundraise for, we'll be moving our family and consumer science classrooms to the former K-Wing, and we're going to do remodeling there. And so we want to upgrade all the appliances and make it new and nice and amazing, and also build an area where we can have chefs come in like on a Tuesday morning and come up with creations and work with our students. We want to replace classroom doors, but in terms of priority, It wasn't a super high priority, so we placed it on our fundraising list. We also want to increase our dry erase space. And I was in a meeting room at a company where they had glass dry erase boards, and I'm definitely pressing Brandon on that. How can we get these glass boards? How can we do the best for our kids and up to date equipment in classrooms so they can feel like they're in a boardroom and so on and so forth when they're in a classroom, right? How can we make that a reality for them? Additionally, we want to, I'm sorry, I'm not controlling the slides. Cool, thank you. We want to put a rubber floor in our new weight room. That's going to be amazing, and we can't wait for that. We've invested a huge chunk of the TID money on increasing, just redoing our theater, and so we're gonna fundraise for some upgraded lighting and stage, and then additionally we want to have some additional money just for some upgrades with furniture. So that's part of the 1.5. And then ultimately, it's been our work, the whole school's work, students, staff, administration, about creating the climate intentionally that we want at La Follette. And I'm going to say this is an ongoing process, and we've been doing beautifully with it. We truly have dug in with a community partner, Time Bank, in developing a restorative community. And so we want to build this outdoor restorative pavilion where classes can take a step out and build classroom community, not when there's time to repair harm. You can use it for that, but how about we build this proactive community? And so that's something that I hope on this list that happens very quickly. And actually one partner has already reached out to me, a community partner, and said that they want to help draw up the plans and see how they can streamline this with us. So building a restorative pavilion, not by accident, but by intentional design, so we can affect the classroom community and build community using restorative as a lever. All right, Brandon, I think it goes back to you.
Thanks, Devon. Did we have any questions up to this point on the La Follette update?
Actually, then are they redoing the cafeteria space at all and the space outside the athletic area as well?
Yes. Yep. They're redoing both spaces. Mm-hmm.
And Brandon, that's part of the base referendum, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Principal LaRosa, I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit about the improvements to the family and consumer science space, which I'm really excited to hear about, and how, I always think of La Follette as a school that's like pretty innovative in terms of food and entrepreneurship, and just a little bit more about tying that into the curriculum and where you might be going with that.
Yeah. Oh, Brandon, you want me to grab it?
Yeah, go ahead, Devon.
I said, if I got questions, I was going to say on time and on budget, and then just mute myself. But no, let me grab that and elaborate for you. So we have two rockstar FCS teachers who are completely community-philic. I'm going to say that they're out in the community, talking to chefs, talking to restaurants, looking to partner. And we truly wanted to give them a space that they get to design and help shape and make 21st century and 20 years, 30 years in the future. Because when we're doing this referendum, it's not just for 3 years from now, it's for 20 and 30 years from now. And so we wanted to make it like have elements of like farm to table. We wanted to partner with local community businesses to be a part of our school, to work with our students, and really like, how can we take this program and do things like almost like a Hello Fresh, where we're making meal prep for teachers and for staff, for just healthy eating, and for students and for families, and partnering with our marketing team, our marketing department at our school, and saying, how can we like make this cross and touch multiple departments? And I'm going to tell you, our teachers are rock stars, and I'm super excited whenever I talk with them. They're doing amazing things with our culinary, and they needed this facelift. And I'm going to tell you, they're out in the community drumming up partnerships left and right, and they're not going to stop.
That's really exciting. Thank you so much. Nikki has one more question.
I had forgotten that. Thank you for agreeing and moving the special ed out of the K-wing. Are there also going to be places for individuals with disabilities to work on like transition skills or job skills?
Absolutely. And there was like a double agenda. We wanted to disrupt the idea of having a K-wing, right? And our students are our students throughout the whole school, and they shouldn't be confined to one area. And classrooms should be all over. And I think that was our double agenda too. And it made complete sense to disrupt at this time, because when is the next referendum? I will long be retired, as will many of us. So I just wanted to call that out.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Brandon, I think we're ready to move on.
Great. Okay, so we'll move on to now Capitol High. For the Capitol High community, staff and student input sessions provided us with priorities that they'd like to see addressed in the design. We are incorporating components such as the breakout spaces, culinary arts, maker spaces, and all gender restrooms. On the next slide, you'll see, I wanted to show this slide to illustrate that what's being developed and detailed. So the design team is meeting with the staff to collect more detailed information on how the spaces are used, and then further feedback on the room arrangements, similar to what I talked about with Follette. Accessibility at this site is the key to making it a usable space for everybody. So the image on the right, upper right, is showing existing, and then down below is showing the addition that we would put on, which is an elevator, as well as an all-gender restroom at each floor. So through the same budgeting exercise summarized in La Follette, the use of the TID funds, we were able to include the top priority buy-up list items through talking through this with Quinn, such as infilling the lower level to create a maker space, increased funds for additional soft seating and furniture, and update it to enhance the learning environment, and then providing more of a community feel with finishes, and then improving sanitary conditions by providing touchless fixtures, providing a dedicated play area for the in-house daycare, removing old lockers and replacing them with more user-appropriate cubbies, and then increasing the data cabling to support T1 internet connections, which is just on the horizon for MMSD. So I'm going to turn it over to Quinn to share the plans and updates for the Capitol High fundraising effort.
Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me in tonight. It's very exciting to be in this space. Those of you that have followed Capitol High's journey know that we have long been pushing for one building for multiple sites, and this helps us realize that vision. As we've gone into the planning with EUA, our students and staff in our community, we've really continued to develop a vision, and thus we're coming to you tonight with a fundraising campaign that we know is a starting point and not necessarily an ending point. There's so much that we want to do in the interior part of the Hoyt building that we're starting our conversation with the Foundation for Madison Public Schools and going from there. They've been an excellent partner and will continue to be an excellent partner to me personally and to Capitol High. And as you saw in the previous slide, our focus is on different classrooms that don't currently exist in our three separated sites. So first, and I believe most important, is ensuring that our childcare space and our childcare space and our daycare, and then our outdoor play area for our students is front and center, so that our entire community knows that we have students who are pregnant and parenting at our building and that they're safe, seen, heard, and welcome. We also know that in part of adding different spaces, such as a culinary arts kitchen, upgrading our gymnasium, adding an art space, those are all spaces we don't have in our buildings right now, that we're going to need things that don't exist right now. The biggest is actually the infill that Brandon just talked about with our auto mechanic maker space. And we're really excited to offer that to our students. That came directly from our students who have said, you've got to do something that helps us do more hands-on learning and create career exploration opportunities for us. And we're following through on that promise. I also think that the fundraising proposal really listens to what the community has said. When we did this early referendum work with the community, we promised and still continue to promise to make this an open two-way space for that community that's very close to Hoyt to come in and use and design in these spaces. So as you can see, 112,000 is the start. Again, at where we end, I'm not sure, but so far the early returns are very promising, and I think the community is getting very excited about supporting Capitol High. We want to make sure, and I think this is the last thing I say, that in upgrading our classrooms and really enhancing our non-traditional learning spaces, that we stick to some of the tenets that were laid out at the beginning: sustainability, accessibility, and then just making sure that all of our spaces are comfortable and inviting for our students, for our staff, and for our community. I was brief, but I'll certainly leave it for any questions that people might have.
Is there any questions about the Capitol High fundraising plan? I have one. I'm just, this is really exciting, and of course we want to center our Capitol High and our SAFER students in these decisions, but it seems like some of these improvements would not only benefit those students, but could also benefit the MSR folks who might be using the facility after hours. And I'm wondering if that's just an opportunity to broaden the potential donor base and the fundraising outreach around this campaign, and potentially tying the community more closely to Capitol High. I don't know if anyone can comment on that.
Sure, Chris, I'll take that one. I absolutely think there's opportunities to do that. And it'll be important to remember that MSR will have its own fundraising campaign happening to support its move itself and its build out of its new property. So I will certainly bring that up to the fundraising team, but know that MSR is also working on building out their fundraising plans through their partner, MSR Friends, who does their fundraising as well.
Hey, thank you so much. Have we been able to work with the city to improve bus routes and transportation for the Hoyt building?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have started conversations. We have not come to a resolution yet, but those conversations are continuing now as and that is all part of this design process and where we're at in the design. So we have city engineering involved, but it'll be a step in the process that as these designs develop, we'll continue those conversations and it'll materialize more.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, one more question, just related to maybe the programmatic aspect of SAFER, but what types of healthcare will be available to students in SAFER accessing that space?
I can take that one, Brandon. We're designing the space specifically to ensure that the daycare is connected to what I think will be the largest nurse's office in the entire district. We're really putting an emphasis on the safety and care of our pregnant and parenting mothers, and making sure that there's an inclusive space for fathers as well, which has been it's been a huge challenge in trying to make that happen across 3 sites. We will also have an adjacent classroom that will be designed specifically for a health science pathway that will be designed on the interior to help students that want to continue to explore what it might be to be a CNA. Many of our students are interested in that pathway. So the students, the staff have spoken, and we think that the design will really take good care of ensuring that there's not only the very the practical end of the healthcare, but also the building out of the career exploration at Hoyt.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, thank you all for your interest.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brendan, and thank you so much, Gwen. I have a follow-up to Davian's question, which I really appreciate bringing it up around transportation and also accessibility, knowing that the 3 new educational sites that we are going to have given the referendum, it's going to impact, walkability, it's going to impact bus transportation, it's going to impact how people are going to be negotiating, transportation and access throughout our community. Given that some of those sites are in parts of the city that have already experienced a great level of disparity in regards to those items that I already shared, I'm curious about, like, do we have our own study around accessibility and transportation impact, or walkability, transportation impact? Because I know the city is also having theirs, but I'm not sure what's happening on our side, and then if there's any ask from us in regards to a greater push in that regard.
So I think I can start on this one. So the district, through our transportation department, I mean, annually does analysis, which determines where our bus routes are and where safe routes to schools starts to come into play with our cross guards and et cetera. So we have district wide. Then in addition to that, moving into the referendum planning process, before the decisions were ever made to move Cap High to Hoyt, we, used current data, which is important to realize because Cap High students are a little bit more mobile. So it is a changing population of students, and where they live, how they get to our current programs, and how they would get to Hoyt. And we had students on this committee kind of reviewing it as well. And the fun part of what we learned is our students know our metro transportation better than anybody else. And they were helping us problem solve for which would be the right access points. In addition to that, we're super excited about the BRT coming out of the mayor's office, and what Metro has planned for right up University Avenue. That's right in Hoyt's backyard. So there's going to be short-term work with Metro that's happening right now as we speak, as Brandon just mentioned, and continues to happen. And there's the BRT work, which is a couple years yet down the road, but will directly assist both West and Hoyt in better public transportation. Once the BRT is running, it'll be faster routes than anyone experiences today.
Yes, thank you so much, Kelly. I think I was speaking to all the sites, so I know you haven't got to the elementary school and to, I'm not sure what we're calling the new building on Holtzman. So I was speaking to the multiple sites, but if there is any recommendations for any of us or any updates on like where we are, and when I speak also accessibility, I'm speaking to accessibility from a physical perspective, but also bike paths and crossing the streets and all that stuff. So thank you so much for that update. I'd love to hear more as the project develops.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Can I just add to Brandon before you move on? I just appreciate everyone's care for transportation for Capitol High. We're the only high school that has students from every corner of the community coming to our buildings. And so it means a great deal to me that has care and attention, because I know it's on our students and families' minds all the time.
Before we move on, Christina Gomishman has a question.
Yeah, and this is more just a comment. I just wanted to say thank you. It's really exciting to see this sort of vision for Capitol High come to life, knowing that we were ready to start working on this space and to go back and work with the community, the Capitol High community, to make this vision more concrete and really involve people in the planning. Really excited about the non-traditional learning spaces and what that's going to mean for students. So just wanted to say thanks.
All right.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
All right. So moving on to Memorial. Those user groups provided us great feedback, providing the design team with the following direction. Again, this seems to be a common theme: bringing more natural light further into the building, improving wayfinding, adding and rearranging music, band, and theater support space to allow for a future theater edition, and then all gender locker room spaces. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see here that providing natural light further into the building was a common comment, and this layout is kind of reflecting that with the different elevation of the heights of the building. And then here you're seeing the floor plan as well, reflecting the feedback of the space arrangements and adjacencies. On the upper right, you'll see the bird's eye view of the art addition, which will also connect the tech building to the main building and add all gender restrooms at each level. And then the lower right is a street view showing the update and refresh of the Gammon Road entrance. And then it also gives you an idea for the massing of the additional theater support space in the background. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who can provide you with an update on fundraising plan for Memorial.
Brandon, thank you. And thank you everyone this evening as well for everything you're doing. Just a quick update. We are at the point where you can see on there that we've been in discussion and identified a substantial amount of donation possibilities. Given that we're only a short time into this fundraising period, you can see that the pledges are at 0, which is not to be, I guess it's kind of expected at this point. Moving forward, we want to go ahead and move with the base referendum, which is going to allow us to actually go in and move towards our vision. So we know at this point that the fundraising is not there to move forward with the full package, but we want that full package eventually. So we're looking at a timeline of after 2023 and to build a phased-in approach to the 2024 PAC after the fact. So again, gift totals of just under 120,000, our fund balance at 81,000. We've had some excellent discussions with some of our donors and just want to continue to move the process forward, knowing that the referendum will keep us moving.
Then if you go to the next slide here, you'll see this is, may look familiar. This is the vision beyond for the fundraising campaign for the theater. And I did want to emphasize, I think I said it in the first slide, but one of the pieces of feedback is to plan for this, is to provide the support space that the theater needs now, but also keep in mind that in the future, this is the bigger picture. This is something that they really want to shoot for.
Yeah, and again, thanking the design team as well too, for really bringing that vision to fruition when they put the proposal together. So very much appreciated.
Yep. All right. So I think we plan to move right into West. During the West High School user group sessions, there were a number of common themes that we took away from there. One was maintaining the historical value and the image of the existing building, improve accessibility throughout it, improving the continuity throughout the school, improve parking, and improve wayfinding. So if you look at the next slide, I wanted to, I guess, assure the board through this process here, just to mention that because this is such a high profile elevation, that the thought process the designers took to complement the existing monument stair entrance with the new Welcome Center addition. You can see there how they analyze the space on the right there with the existing grand staircase, and then how it relates to the new Welcome Center. A lot of thought being put into that. Analyzing the architectural makeup of this grand stair and using those elements on the new Welcome Center addition. In the next slide here, you can see the additional parking in the northwest corner, or the west side of the slide. You can see where the arrow is pointing. That's where we're going to be putting additional parking. And it also can be used as a drop-off point for special ed. And then on the right, just to help give you an idea, is the perspective view of the pool and gymnasium addition, and how the massing relates to the existing building, and then also the buildings around it, like the neighborhood. Then the next slide. This is the floor plan. It's just an example to show you, as I've been saying in these during this presentation, that the design team is collecting user input for adjacency of spaces. What's important so it flows, the workflow, who communicates on a daily basis. Like, we're taking all that information in and into what's called a program, and then we're putting it into this design, and then we're coming back around to the school. This time around, it's called design development to get their feedback. Like, did we get it right? And then get further details on what they actually do in that space. Make sure we get the power where it needs to be and the lighting correct. So now I want to hand it over to Karen. And she'll provide an update of the fundraising progress for the pool, the media center, the track, and the enclosed courtyard.
Thank you, Brandon. First of all, Nama West student, congratulations on your seat on the Board of Education. I also want to thank the board for their time and their support as we learn how to really and truly thoughtfully engage over time in these public-private partnerships. The West scope is ambitious, which we always knew. We had our first meeting. The launch of the project was last Tuesday on June 8th. It's been extraordinarily exciting as we organize our teams and our mail campaigns, email campaigns, phone campaigns. We have an event tonight. We have an event on Wednesday. We have an event on Thursday. So while you see that the dollar amounts are beginning to trickle in, they are beginning to trickle in. And the feedback that we're getting from our 29,000 alumni is very, very exciting. We are continuing full steam ahead until July, when we know we may be forced with some difficult decisions. We plan to continue to fundraise for the expanded cross pool, adding 3 additional lanes for a total of 11 lanes, because that must happen now. We can't add it later. But much as Matt has said with the memorial campaign, we understand that there is no finish line to this fundraising, and that we will continue to fundraise until we too can meet our vision, which of course is the cross pool and the digital design studio first, and then the expanded athletics addition, the additional bonus room, and then the atrium. All of these projects are wonderful and really will highlight the learning experience and the belongingness our students feel in the school, but we also have to be realistic about where we are in the campaign. I am very excited about what we're learning, and look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thanks, Brandon.
Sure, thanks, Karen. On the next slide, you'll see some images that should look familiar. This is just kind of an overview of their fundraising campaign. Really exciting things at West School. Wow, I mean, this, yeah, really exciting stuff.
I just want to say the architects have been amazing in what they have done with the base scope. And it's an extraordinarily collaborative process, and good for all of us who are engaging in it. We're all learning so much.
Thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're gonna move on to East now. At East, the feedback sessions with the student staff community pretty much summarizes improved wayfinding and providing a clear identity to the Welcome Center. Maintaining the historical value and image, and then bringing more natural light into the building and the mall area, and then enhancing a community feel. So if you go to the next slide, this is the street view of the new Welcome Center addition. You can see that a lot of care has been taken in complementing the existing building facade, much like West. We want to make sure it complements it. So the architects made sure and did a deep dive evaluation into how the building elements would relate. On the next slide, again, this is an example of the floor plans developing based on feedback, adjacency of spaces. And they'll be this project is a few steps behind West and Follette. We've staggered the projects, so you're not going to see. They're working towards that, and they'll be coming back around soon to the East user groups. Once they have it laid out, checking in, does this make sense? Does this work for you? And getting additional feedback on the design and layout. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brendan, who will provide just a general progress update on their fundraising plans.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. I'll be very brief. East is really excited about the referendum improvements and the way they're taking shape, but we are also currently assessing the viability of a very exciting capital fundraising project inspired by community input, but it is too early in the process to share specifics this evening. So this would happen outside the scope of the referendum improvements, and we hope to have more to share by the end of the summer. I just want to thank Brandon and the team for helping us to get this going, and thank the board for your support. More to come very soon. And I'll just leave it there. No board action requested tonight for us.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, very exciting prospects. So were we going to stop at this point, or should I go through the elementary school?
Let's just pause here quickly. Are there any questions about East Weston Memorial? Nikki?
It's actually more of a thank you and have question. I got to tour East, West, and Memorial with the design team to make sure it was accessible. And I really, one, appreciate it. But two, also just on Memorial, that doesn't mean that the back has to be used for special ed, correct? It can be, they can still, special ed students still are able to use the front entrance like we had discussed, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, Nikki, and we were just talking about this earlier today. They have that option, or we're going to have a drop off right on curbside on Ash Street too. So either way, there will be options. They can come right in the front, or if it's convenient to go in on the Van High side too.
I appreciate it, and it was kind of great seeing architects that we brought extra wheelchairs to see what it was like from that point of view, and worked out really, really well. And I'm really pleased with all the accessibility and designs of the lights especially, so thank you all.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thanks. Let's move on.
Okay. All right. So Southside Elementary has kind of a different set of challenges, design challenges. For one, it's an elementary school instead of a high school, and we're doing it's all about pretty much this big addition that we're putting on the front facade. So we need to complement the existing design, but we also need to maintain the sustainability theme that reflects the culture of the neighborhood, existing building, Badger Rock Middle School, and then the rooted tenants. Some of the feedback we received from the community and the user groups include maintaining the culture of the environmental sustainability, promote partnerships amongst users through the building design, and then acknowledge and account for transportation and pedestrian traffic. So if you go to the next slide, this should be new and fresh, fairly hot off the presses. This is an image from kind of the Rimrock Badger Road corner. You can see like the blonde masonry is intended to match the existing brick of the building, and then adding a darker like iron spot brick to align with the theme of other adjacent neighborhood buildings. If you've been in that kind of that neighborhood, you can see a lot of adjacent buildings. They went for that. It's like a darker charcoal iron spot, but there's also a variation of that that's more brown and more academic feeling. of an iron spot, and it'll really mesh well with the neighborhood. And on the next slide, this one may look familiar. This is kind of the initial spatial arrangement that we've been working with the Alice team. And this is a block diagram showing kind of the scaled room arrangements and how they relate. And it's really just highlighting the 3 distinct entrances for the elementary and the middle school, and then the rooted neighbors. And the facade is going to be, it kind of aligns with Rimrock Road. So that's it's running parallel to Rimrock Road, and that's about 250 feet off Rimrock. And then if you go to the next slide, again, through the same budgeting exercises summarized with La Follette, Cap High, their use of TID funds, we're able to include a lot of top priority buy-up list items. So we've broken it down with 1.2 million being applied to sustainable components such as green roofs, real-time monitoring of energy generation and usage, technology that will support current demands and allow for future expansion and themes. This will also be applied to enhance the interior environment through furnishings and finish and graphics to reflect the culture of the building and the neighborhood. Then 500,000 will be set aside for the middle school classrooms build out. We're currently reviewing options with Badger Rock team. And the construction management team, much like before, as I mentioned before, they're going to be generating a budget estimate where we'll review the feasibility of incorporating these designs into the overall plan. So I'll turn it back over to Kelly.
All right, thank you. So we're ready to wrap up this part of the conversation for you. And we're extremely excited to get ready for the next steps. So our team this summer, well, actually first, you are going to be voting on those TID 25 projects that you heard about tonight. They're built into the budget book that you have in your hands and in our conversation that we'll have a little bit later this evening. $7.5 million is the revenue we're expected in the 21-22 school year from the city when they close TID 25. $5 million of that will go to La Follette, as you just heard with their planning. A little over $1 million to the new elementary school, as you just heard, and then about $800,000 to the Capitol High build out of that bottom really exciting space there. So that will be built into the budget, not a separate motion. It's already built in. And then you'll have the fundraising plans at the end of the month where you'll take one motion to approve La Follette's fundraising plan so they can get going and starting to collect money, and a second motion at the end of the month for Cap High. Over the course of the summer, Brandon will be working with our design team on all of the great feedback we have, the pictures that you just saw, and turning them into full design schemes to get ready for what will be the next steps around going out to bid on these projects. So you will be getting updates throughout the summer. You'll be getting updates in the fall, but you will not formally hear from our team again, probably until September, where Brandon will come back up from air after a lot of good work and have some really exciting new updates for you in September. East High just did foreshadow for you. They may have a fundraising plan ready for you in August and September as well. So that's the exciting work coming up. And if there's no further questions, that's all we have for you tonight. Thank you very much for all the principals for their great work. And I can't thank Brandon enough for the incredible amount of work he's led over the last 6 to 8 months. There's a lot of work here. So thank you, team. Thank you, design team. Thank you, EUA. Handing it back to you, Chris.
All right. Any final questions about facilities or the Rimrock Elementary School? Nikki?
Just one, though not related. Thank you, Kelly, for your work.
Thank you, Nikki.
Kelly, I have a kind of detailed question about TID 25. I'm just wondering, like, I know that the funding is going to become available in the coming school year, and it's going to be built into the budget book. Do we anticipate any of the spending will actually begin in 21-22, or is that really going to happen further down the road?
Yeah, that's a good question. Brandon, there will certainly be architecture fees that'll happen in the 21-22 school year. Any build out that will happen?
Yeah, for the TID work, I would see maybe some demolition work would be starting in preparation. Demolition that would otherwise not be yeah, I would say demolition work for the most part through June, would it be June 30th of 2022, and then at that point we would start building it back. So.
And I also had a question, Kelly, about the fundraising updates we'll be getting from Memorial and West in September, as well as a possible fundraising plan for East. Can you give us a little foreshadowing of what we might expect in September, particularly from Memorial and West at this point?
Yeah, so as you heard from our schools, they continue to kind of fundraise at full speed ahead. For Memorial, what you heard from Matt tonight is that they have already decided to move their fundraising campaign out to 2024, which means that they no longer attach to this September deadline. Instead, what they're going to do is go through with the base referendum as planned with the community. And they will continue to fundraise for that overall theater at Memorial through 2024, which at that point, all the other referendum projects will be done. And they will take on what we call phase 2 work, which is their own project above and beyond the referendum, based on the funds that they have fundraised at that point in time and the design and vision at that point in time in the future. West is taking a slightly different path, which is they're going to continue fundraising ahead through September, because they do believe they've got a couple pretty big wins coming in very, very soon here. Based on what they have fundraised at that point in time, they will reevaluate the projects that are on those referendum lists. And what you heard from West tonight is the atrium has the possibility of being a phase 2 project. So to the extent that they may have to scope down, they will put the atrium out into 2024 project, much the same way Memorial has just stated they would do for the theater.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
Anything else before we move on? All right, well, thank you so much to all of the principals for being here tonight to answer our questions and talk, relay the excitement and the voices from your community around these projects. Thank you to Brandon and Kelly for the presentation. And most of all, thank you to our school communities for continuing to provide us feedback and tell us what you want to see, and being our partners as we move forward with these really exciting projects. All right, let's move on to our next discussion, which is our budget update. The decision associated with this presentation is the June 28th vote on the draft preliminary budget. We've been discussing the budget in earnest for a good 6 months now, so I think we're in a really good place, and I think we have a very strong budget, which is exciting after all the uncertainty and challenge we had last year. I encourage everyone to ask whatever final clarifications or questions you may have tonight, so that we go into our June 28th budget vote with the information we need to make a decision. There will be 3 pause points in this presentation. We will pause following the update on the state budget for any questions about what's going on at the state level. We will pause again following the presentation about ESSER 2 planning revisions, again to get clarification on how we're going to use federal funds. And then we'll pause at the end of the presentation for any final questions. Kelly, does that cover it?
It sure does. If I accidentally miss a pause point, Chris, stop me.
Okay.
All right. Dr. Jenkins, do you have anything before we kick it off?
No, I think we've said it like 3 times, and so let's say it a 4th time. And I think we're pretty much there, with the exception of the state new proposal, and I know you'll cover that, so I'm good. Thank
We
you.
will. All right, awesome. So for time's sake, I'm going to go through the first couple slides fairly quickly tonight. We always start off our budget. We know we need to put students in the room, students in the center, and we do that by putting our mission and vision of as a school district into the room, which is that every school be a thriving school that prepares every student to graduate from high school, college, career, and community ready. Our strategic framework lays out a set of core values: belonging, excellence, creativity, racial equity, social justice, voice, and focus. And as I have had the honor and privilege to take, go ahead, Barb, you can stay right here, no problem. I have had the honor and privilege of taking our draft budget, which is in your hands tonight, out into the community for the last month and a half. We've been through multiple focus and stakeholder groups, and every single one of them, I've asked them to take these core values and these goals laid out in our strategic framework and to put them in front of them and to hold our budget up to them and to give us their feedback. If our budget is not in line with these core values and does not seem to aim to get to these goals, then we missed something. So that's where our feedback that we will be sharing with you tonight that we heard from the community is really prefaced in that discussion with the community that we've been having for the last year as the referendum feedback started, but certainly over the last month and a half with the specific draft budget in their hands. So as we move on through the presentation tonight, we'll continue to put our education equity policy as the way we operate that strategic framework into our budget. And we'll look through the objectives of our meeting in our next slide. So we take our planning approach, right? We've been through this together. We built our budget from January to April following this approach. We made assumptions all the way back in January, which always seems like a lifetime ago by the time we hit our June vote. But we continue to go through this cycle. So over the last month and a half, we've gone through it again, validating assumptions and staffing, where we're spending our money. And tonight is kind of our last check on that before you guys vote. So the goal is to make sure you're comfortable with what's in this budget. All questions are answered, no rock unturned. So then we get to the end of the month, it can be a clean vote. And we can move into an exciting new school year, 21-22 school year, fresh budget, hopefully coming out of COVID-19 on July 1, and we're set to go as a school district moving forward. So our objectives tonight, I've just gone through. We'll revisit the state, what we know about the state, where the state is at. We'll share the feedback that we've received. We'll share the revisions that we made based on that feedback, cover the ESSER 2 planning and the TID 25 items we just discussed, and take a look at Fund 50 and Fund 80. All right, budget timeline we've been through. This is the last and final discussion for the June budget vote. And then we'll be back in September and October for any final revisions that this budget may need, pending the moves at the state level. All right, so going on to the next slide. We're going to spend a little bit of time here, and this is where Chris has a pause point. So what we know is we have a budget in your hands right now. That budget has a $100 per pupil revenue limit estimate increase, which generates about $3 million of new revenue this year. And then theoretically generates about $5 million for the 22-23 school year. This budget book, the 21-22 school year, however, also has to look to the state. The state is what actually gives us our revenue limit. By state statute, the state should be giving us our budget by the end of June, which would then validate our assumptions theoretically before you vote. However, what we've seen from our current state in the last biennium is we did not receive a state budget by the end of the month. And that is everything that we anticipate at this point in time based on the state deliberations. Earliest we can probably expect to receive a state biennium budget is mid-July, based on kind of where we're at in the current negotiations at this point. The Joint Finance Committee has now looked at the K-12 budget, and they have already voted on the K-12 budget. They're wrapping up the overall state budget shortly here, but this K-12 budget they've actually voted on. And what you see in bold is what they have voted on, which then would bounce it back to the governor for reevaluation until or unless the Joint Finance Committee makes other changes to the K-12 budget. So what they have in here is $0 revenue limit increase this year $0 revenue limit increase next year with no changes to categorical aid either. That would be up to a $3 million loss for us this year and potentially up to a $5 million loss next year. We have not changed the budget book, however, because we do not have a state budget yet. And we do believe that kind of students-centered thinking and like higher, greater minds, we believe can come together based on the new revenue available at the state and based on where clear public sentiment is around our public schools and educating our students go. We believe that this state will have to come together over the next couple of weeks and give us a budget that invests in students and invests in schools as we pull out of COVID-19. So we've not changed our budget yet. If we continue to see these $0 items by the time the state budget is approved, the board will need to be making adjustments in the October version of the budget. We are planning for that. Should that happen, we will have plans available, but we do believe advocacy efforts are the right direction for students. And we are not yet at a point where we feel like we should be under investing in our students until or unless the last final signature is on that budget. And then we'll have to make the changes that may be necessary. On the special education aspect, this Joint Finance Committee has not put any new money into special education reimbursement aid. While they've moved the percentages, they have not grown the pot. And if the pool or the pot has not gotten any bigger, MMSD is not likely to see any additional revenues out of the special education reimbursement aid, regardless of where the percentages go. So at this point, we are projecting no additional increase to special education reimbursement aid. We currently have ESSER 2 fully budgeted, and it is in your vote for the end of the month. At this point, we are hopeful that ESSER 2 will remain available to public schools, kind of, again, regardless of what happens at the state level, but we are awaiting additional feedback from both the federal government and the DPI on ESSER 2. ESSER 3, we know, is at risk should the state not put any more money into this budget and not meet the minimum requirements from the federal government to be eligible for ESSER 3. So that $40 million is not in this budget, although we certainly have very important plans in play, some of which would be coming to you in October, and many planned for 22-23 and the 23-24 school year. Probably less spoken about around the impacts of the state budget should no more money be placed in is our title funding. Our entire title funding, you name it, Title 1, 2, 4, all of them are at risk for the 22-23 school year if the state does not meet their minimum investments into public education. That is critical for our 22-23 school year success. So that cannot be kind of under-evaluated as we take a look at the Joint Finance Committee's current decision-making process. We are very thankful to our local community for the local operating budget. I've said this before, and it remains that this budget and the investments we're making into kids are entirely thankful for the local community and the support that they gave to Madison schools through the November referendum. It's more needed now than ever, and we cannot be more thankful for our community right now as things get tough again at the state level. So overall, we will be planning for a balanced budget, which is in your hands, which we're asking for you to vote on at the end of the month. And we'll create backup plans should we need them as we get closer to October. Superintendent Jenkins, do you want to jump in?
Yes. First of all, thanks, Kelly. You articulated this very well, but I have to highlight the piece when you mentioned advocacy. Having seen many state budgets and some that have just not been supportive of public education, this particular budget would be detrimental if it goes through as it is written. And there's no way around it. We talk about leading in a district that's on a journey to be anti-racist and doing what is right for children. This budget that's being proposed by the Joint Finance Committee is totally against public education as I see it. And I'm not going to be silent about it. This, I want you, before you vote on it, to really think about what our local people have done in terms of our referendum, in terms of trying to support us. But in terms of this other Joint Finance Committee budget, we need to advocate and advocate strongly if we're going to take our children not only in our district, but just throughout the country. We're just coming out of a pandemic, taking our staff and taking our communities and putting in the social, emotional, and mental health supports that's needed and to do the work as we know need to be done. This is a very serious vote on this particular budget, and it's also a time for us to really advocate for what is right. This budget cuts at 70% of the Black and brown children in our state. It cuts at the rural, it cuts at the suburbs. There's no way around it. This is not good for public education. So I want to make sure that I'm clear about, I am very sad about what I'm seeing being proposed, but I'm even more fired up to begin to advocate in the right ways to make sure that individuals understand that this will seriously impact public education. And quite frankly, it will begin to destabilize some of the things that we're trying to make some traction on coming out of COVID-19. Thank you, Kelly.
Do we have any questions from board members before we move on?
Yeah, Kelly, I just had a clarification question process-wise. You mentioned that there is potentially a timeline still for the Joint Finance Committee to make changes. Can you clarify that timeline and how that process might work?
Well, it's hard to know because the state statute requires that it would be done by the end of June. And in the past, they have just missed their own state statute deadlines. So the process becomes a little unknown and uncharted territory once we get past the end of June. What we know is that the governor has a line item veto authority. And so he'll be receiving a budget coming out of the Joint Finance Committee soon here. Him and his team will have to sit down and read through that budget and decide if their kind of line item veto authority gets them to where they know is at a minimum required for the governor to sign. And of course, we don't know exactly where that line is for him, but he has made a number of comments regarding what he saw out of the K-12 budget. If he can get something out of the line item veto process, he may sign it. And if they can't, he may not. But he would have to reject the entire state budget. He can't reject just a piece of it. And so rejecting the entire state budget has all kinds of implications statewide for all kinds of things. So he's going to have to weigh that out. And we hear him talking through that, his own thought process in the public already. If he vetoes the entire budget, it starts to look a little bit way the federal government budget looks, right? Which is you're kind of at this stalemate of current investment, which would look like no new money. And so those zeros would hold while we're waiting for a budget. If and when we ever get one. But it starts to look and feel a little more the way the federal government might when there's a stalemate in the budgeting process. We all hope we won't get there. 2 years ago, we were in the last biennium. It was just as difficult as it looks and feels today. And we did see that the governor was able to get some good gains. Not everything we wanted, of course, but some good gains for public schools out of his line item veto process. So there's certainly some hope to hold out there too.
Yeah, and I'll have to add again, yes, there is some hope based upon if the governor takes that stand, which I have every reason to believe that he will. But this also destabilizes what we're doing with special education. And as Kelly also mentioned, all of our titles. And we really risk maintenance of efforts with this particular plan that's on the table. So I can't say it to you enough. This Thursday, the Joint Finance Committee individuals are going to be hearing from the community. So if you have an opportunity to pen a letter together as a board, we've joined already with MTI and sent a letter on our behalf saying what we think the impact would be. This is a time for advocacy, and I can't say it any stronger right now. So if we could do anything before this Thursday, it would be great to do that. And I would be more than happy to assist any of you with that.
Yeah, Chris, I want to thank you for that question, and I'd like to direct my question at our general counsel. So if we do get to the place where we see the state budget surpassing their own state tax statute in terms of negotiating the state budget, which we've seen before, we've seen that take, up until September. What is our legal recourse in terms of this, especially when you talk about the federal implications? This has, the ability to undermine the tremendous amount of work that we as a community have done. And so I'm wondering what our options are in terms of navigating this, and what our legal options are in terms of responding to something like this.
Well, Lee, certainly that's where the board has to start making fiscal decisions that might not have been in alignment with what they previously communicated, right? We can't spend what we don't have. And so then we would go back into essentially pulling the budget apart and seeing where we could make adjustments. Because as Kelly has continuously said, our budget has to balance. And so if we're getting word that things aren't balancing, we're going to have to make changes.
Sherry, is there a timeline that we have to interact with in terms of being able to vote for a budget that is aspirational and then realizing or recognizing that we're engaged in deficit spending?
Well, we take the preliminary vote as we always do in June. And then we reevaluate in October. And hopefully by October, we'll have an answer. Otherwise, we may have to take further action even after October.
Thank you so much for elaborating how our own process kind of interacts with this, because I think it's an important area to clarify as we move forward. That's it for my questions.
Amanda?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much, Chris, for setting us up to have this conversation really directly and specifically. Thank you, Kelly, for all the exercise around the budget. And I know that although the state has been really uncertain around budget, you always do a tremendous job and staying positive. And I think this year reflected that, and I know this is not a reflection of your work. So I appreciate this slide because it sets clear what we're looking at. I think for me, some of the questions and maybe aligned to what Board President Ali has mentioned already. What are some of the budget line items that are at risk of getting funded right now?
So the last bullet right here really covers that answer. So at this point, the goal is always, go back one more slide for me, Barb. The goal is always to protect students and staff, right? To keep schools at the center. And that would be the case for any and all contingency plans going into September. It'll be more difficult in the 22-23 school year, to kind of create an aspirational budget. But this year, the idea would be to close any of our gaps that may arise from one-time funding sources, because after July, it's going to become incredibly difficult to shift direct programs for students, direct programming for staff, and still create the academic goals and supports that we know our students need, right? So we'll be making all kinds of moves for one-time savings to make the budget work for this year. But by the time you hit 22-23, you're gonna have to make reoccurring structural changes. Those things are almost impossible this time of year to make. Those are things that need to be planned for, accounted for in November and December in order to operationalize by June. So your work is going to be really cut out for you for 22-23, for 21-22. Our team come October will recommend to you some one-time savings depending on where we are with the state. But you won't see any shifts in this budget until we hit October, because even after we get a state budget, there's going to be many, many moving parts. Enrollment, state aid, general aid, property values, they'll all still move on us some. And so it'll be October before we can get a full plan in front of you. But you won't be in deficit spending between July and October because you don't have a final budget yet. So you won't be in technical deficit spending terms. October will be the incredible budget balancing vote, and you'll see good proposals using most likely one-time spending.
Thank you for highlighting some of the pieces that are we're going to be, it's already in our minds in regards to fall update. Are we, I don't know if it's premature to say that, but I think given so many conversations we've been having, and I think the sentiment of this board is to do exactly what you listed on the first bullet of the potential fall budget around protecting our students and staff. But given enrollment and given, uncertainties, I would say continuing uncertainties around hybrid model, a virtual model, in-person model, do you anticipate staff cuts both at the teacher level and at central office? I don't think we're.
From anything we see right now in the slide I just presented, no, we believe we can close a $3 million gap with one-time funding sources. Unknowns above and beyond, if enrollment projections are incredibly off, some other thing is incredibly off, those will be proposals that we would put forward to you by October. But based on what we know and what we see right now, and our assumptions, or even what potentially changes at this point, I do not foresee that going ahead. But again, we don't know what we don't know just yet.
Thank you so much for all your work.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Stadium.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for the thought you put into this. We're certainly in multi-dimensional budget scenarios. Do you have any idea what would happen if the state reverts back to base budget? So there's a veto budget, what that means for us?
Yeah, so a base budget would mean no new revenue, which is the $0 joint finance proposal, the $0 categorical aid, and general aid at the same amount that it was this year, which is basically all kind of what is already in this joint finance committee proposal. So we basically still, even in that point, aren't anticipating that much less than what we see in this joint finance committee worst case, which is a bad case to be. But I don't think it's going to get too much worse than that. Again, we have to wait and see how it all plays out, but we have to be cautious with moving forward. We need to be planful with moving forward. We need to have plan A, B, C, and D. All of that, which we will do, we will all walk ahead carefully. But I also do not think that this is the summer nor the fall where we want to walk into with a whole lot of extra contingencies and wonderings, right? We all need to have a good summer and gear up for the fall. And we're just going to have some patience with the state and the steps that they will take. And when we know what comes out of the state, we will be ready to act. We will have and put our plans in play. But I just don't want to, I want to caution everybody too much on planning for the worst case as well, because our students and our staff need us, and they need us to get ready for the fall with our head on straight. And that is also incredibly important right now.
Thanks.
Nikki and then Ananda.
One, Kelly, thank you for making numbers clear to someone who's not a numbers person.
Mm-hmm.
I always marvel at that, and so I appreciate that. Just a quick question on the number of special ed assistants. I know they fluctuated some on the 4K level. We're not planning on changing them any further before October, as far as you know, correct?
That is correct. There are no plans any further. There's always some small adjustments at the school level. But the planning model, the staffing model that's in the workbook that you have in your hands right now for June is the staffing model I would expect by October, again, without foreseeing any major enrollment shifts that we can't predict. I think the June budget that you'll have in the staffing model will be very similar to October.
I appreciate I agree with the sentiment. We gotta put our staff, we gotta put our students, we gotta put our schools first, and I don't think this budget does that. I know there is a press conference coming up with WPEN to speak out against the budget. I don't know if MMSD is participating or not, but I would strongly suggest we do so. And that's all I got.
Thanks, Nikki. The WPEN is on our radar. We appreciate that. And appreciate the advocacy. All right, Chris, should I move on?
Ananda has a question.
Sorry, Kelly, I think one more follow-up question. I understand that the Big Idea project is fully funded by After Two. Is that in any way in jeopardy? I was too thinking about continuing to move forward with that. Okay.
ESSER 2, we are planning on still moving ahead with the plans. There's a couple adjustments, which I'll get to in a couple of slides for you. But yes, ESSER 2 is fully budgeted and we plan on moving ahead. We are awaiting kind of final and official guidance that we will receive ESSER 2 money, irregardless of the state budget. But we're moving ahead because we know DPI has those funds kind of already in hand. And so we believe those will come to the school district. At least that is our planning assumption at this point.
Any other questions at this point? Kelly, I just want to confirm what you said, that we're putting staff and students at the center, and the one-time budget reductions would not include things like our equity projects or steps, lanes, base wage, health insurance. That's all. We're in good shape on all those fronts at this point.
Those things are all in the reoccurring budget category. That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good.
Let's
All
move
right.
on.
Okay, so the slide in front of you is an updated, oh, no, that's it, thank you, is an updated operating budget. It is updated since the version in April. So I just want to point out to you some of the significant changes. First of all, we do, as I just mentioned, have a $100 per pupil revenue limit in that very first line called property taxes. Should the state not come forward on $100 per pupil, that number will drop by the time you see October, which generates the budget gap conversation we'd be having. But for now, it is in there. And what we have now also added into that very top property tax row is the $7.5 million of TID 25 closing revenue. That is one-time revenue. One time. Once you spend it, it's gone. But it is in there. Without the TID money in there, you're looking at a 0.06 increase on that line item. So the one-time TID funding sources is a bit of an anomaly that makes that number increase more than our actual spending power does. Similarly, you'll see on the federal sources on the revenue side, we have now put in ESSER 2. ESSER 2 is that $18.9 million. And that is why you see that source, really, the percentage just spike up. ESSER 2, as we all know, again, is just one-time federal sources. So it has limited ability to support long-term sustainable change. But we're certainly using it, as we've all talked about for months now, for positive, innovative ways of thinking and trying to move the academic needle and support structure for students forward. On the expense side, then you see those revenues start to play out. So with $18.9 million of ESSER 2 funding budgeted for across the instructional staffing salaries in the student support categories, carry the bulk of that ESSER 2 money, you really see those percentages jump up. That pupil services increases 25%, right? So there's your evidence that your ESSER 2 is being spent directly on students and staff. The other piece of the ESSER2 money really goes to building services at this point. $4 million of the ESSER2 Big Ideas campaign went into the redesign of indoor and outdoor classrooms, the environmental spaces, for example, that you've heard about, super excited about that work. And then the $7.5 million of TID money is also budgeted into that same line, which is why that building services line jumps up by 24%. It's entirely due to those two items. Prior to that, in the previous budget, you would have seen that building services was actually a decreased percentage. So I want to make sure you understand why a couple of those things are jumping up from the last time you saw the budget. Moving on to the next slide. Then what we did is we take this budget out into the community, and you see all the great, wonderful focus groups that have given us feedback on the budget here in this slide. And we've layered in the referendum feedback, which we've been planning through since we started this budget process in January. Our feedback from our focus groups remains pretty consistent with what we heard in the referendum, not a big surprise, around equity projects supporting our students of color, investments into high quality and diverse staff, and investments into buildings. But we got some really good detail out of these focus groups. And on the next slide, you'll see that the consistency amongst our focus groups, kind of irregardless of age, irregardless of race, irregardless if they were students or community members, the feedback was consistent this year on the positive aspects of our budget, and which had a lot of support. So the bullets on this slide are where we received the most support. Restorative justice, number one. Not a single focus group didn't talk about our restorative justice work. Same thing with full day 4K, top two. Closely followed behind our letters and our reading focus for full supports, mental health. The counselor ads at middle school got a tremendous amount of support, as did revamping curriculum, the virtual learning program, indoor and outdoor classroom investments using ESSER2, and our internet access for all using ESSER2, all totally funded. A pretty big caveat that I want to put that we heard from the focus groups regarding any of our positions, including the counselors or the restorative justice coaches, for example. And that caveat's important. Our students of our focus groups of color were very clear. These sound like really good positions. They sound like the right positions in the right places. But if you do not hire these folks that are bilingual, and if they're not staff of color, MMSD, you will not reach the outcomes intended with these positions. So focus on hiring staff of color. And if you need to leave them open until you find the right staff, that's what you should do. That was a loud and clear feedback cycle that I thought was incredibly important to share with you tonight. On the next slide, what we started to get into with our focus groups is where they suggested some potential shifts in the budget book, of which we have adjusted, and I'll dive into kind of where the adjustments have been made after this slide. So this is a summary. Lots of support for the social worker, LTE, added using ESSER2. But a lot of feedback suggesting that maybe they should be FTE, full-time equivalents, that maybe we could hire higher quality people and keep them on longer. Restorative justice, lots of support for our current plan, and a push towards potentially a larger budget in order to hold more accelerated restorative justice work for elementary and middle schools. A lot of conversations about the ground up work of restorative justice, building climate and culture from elementary up to high schools, while also focusing at the high school level. Diversity and training of school staff, comes up in every single focus group we have and has for a couple of years now. So we continue to hear about the Grow Your Own strategy, but a higher focus on the hiring and retaining staff of color. For the focus groups are well aware of some of the questions and concerns about retaining our staff of color, and it became a theme through a number of the conversations. And then staff PD and mentoring specifically on equity and the anti-racist training with teachers was a key theme through the feedback sessions as well. We heard from many of our partners in the community around kind of ESSER 2 and 3 funds. and where partnerships might continue to be expanded or further invested in for mental health, restorative justice, social emotional, but also in the arts. Lots of comments about art and education, murals using ESSER 3 funding. So there's starting to be a theme around maybe what ESSER 3, and as we start to envision the budgeting for ESSER 3 in the upcoming months when we know it's coming, that can be really pulled from these notes. Lots of supports from the counselors, and some feedback wondering about furthering the investments into counselors at high school. Book rooms, lots of desire for more books. This is mostly from school staff at this point, for more culturally relevant books in our school libraries. And then work-based learning came up from some of our sessions as well. So I'll walk you through the adjustments that we made based on the feedback we heard from the community. Before I do that, the book room comment, we do expect a slightly bigger budget coming from our Common School Fund from the state. We haven't heard those final numbers yet, but we expect to receive a little bit of a bump up there, which will be very good for all of our local our school libraries, as that funding gets directly transferred to the school librarians as soon as we get it. So we think we'll be able to move on some of that by the time we get those numbers in October. In the actual budget itself, here are some of the adjustments we made on the next slide. For the local budget, that's the reoccurring base local budget. We heard from our students loud and clear, and we're super excited to be supporting the Bleed Shamelessly effort, looking at a 2-year implementation plan in joint partnership between the students, the staff, our health team, and our building services team, to invest $200,000 next year, implementing that across our schools, and then finishing the remainder schools for the 22-23 school year. So that is built into the budget book in your hands. And then on the next slide are shifts that we made using ESSER 2 funding to adjust with what we heard from the community. So we have gone in and shifted the social worker LTE over to FTE, with known kind of funding plans needed for as the federal funding rolls out. These positions will either need to move to local budgets using your referendum authority, or people will need to be moved into open vacancies from retirements. So that'll be for a future discussion, but that shift has been made. We have added $100,000 to the restorative justice plan. As the plan gets built out, it would make more available resources for the plan to be implemented quicker and sooner. So we're excited about that. You heard about the ANET proposal to accelerate to 11 more schools last Monday, so I won't go into too much more depth there. And I have Jorge here in just a minute after I take your next round of questions, where Jorge is going to give you, with Lachelle, a much more greater look at the teacher mentoring program that is new and exciting with ESSER 2 funds. And then Chris Carusi suggested in one of our last operation work group meetings that was supported, at least in theory, by the board, of moving the building services project manager again from LTE over to FTE in anticipation of hiring higher quality staff. So that shift in the budget has been made following the last operation work group. The Big Ideas campaign, after further, deeper vetting and planning, $2 million has been budgeted for in 21-22, based on what we believe the actual spending will be by the time the planning, the ramp up, and the spending occurs. And then we're holding $3 million for the 22-23 budgets for what has been approved from the Big Ideas campaign. So it's a 2-year and expansion plan there. And I already mentioned the Reimagining Classroom is $4 million for the indoor-outdoor remodeling of the classroom spaces. So that's what we have, Chris, on this kind of overall look at the June budget book, the updates that have been made based on the feedback in the community and the feedback we've received to you today. Before I hand this over to Jorge, I am happy to pause for questions.
Any questions or feedback at this point? Thank you, Kelly. Can you go back to, just a quick question on, I think 2 slides ago, in regards to you elevated the wanting for higher, one more. Yeah, is there, you made it really salient, and I did hear the caution around the results won't happen unless we have a diverse bilingual staff. Are there any policy implications or any additional policy implications that are in the way of us doing this or supporting this?
I don't know that there's any policy implications in that hiring, would be an activity done by our administrative team. But certainly that is feedback that we are taking loud and clear. And a good example of that is the mental health navigator role. That's one of the mental health investments has been posted as a bilingual required position. And that isn't intentional, right? In order to make sure we get the right person in the right room for the students of whom they serve. So that moving in that direction of continuing recruiting efforts and making sure we get the right people in the right spot it always is a challenge, and we know that availability of our bilingual staff and our staff of color isn't always possible. But the HR team implementing kind of their recruiting strategies in line with that vision, it's important to put it on the forefront of the conversation, but I don't think there's a policy implication per se.
Thank you. And then the next slide, I really appreciate how you quoted the voices of the focus groups of people of color and the the groups of school staff. I have a technical question, and then I wanted to go into a little bit deep. The largest support by school staff referencing there, is that in absence of the focus groups of color, or that's also included?
I think it's school staff are probably most apt to give some of the more detailed feedback, right? Because they live and operate in our schools. So it's not that the focus groups of color didn't give feedback or wouldn't agree with it, but it was really a focus area that the school staff kind of kept bringing up, whether it was a principal group or a teacher group. Whereas probably some of our other more community groups just don't have that level of insight.
I really appreciate the way you disaggregated this, mostly because, in particular, in a racially diverse board, I think a lot of folks sometimes don't understand that communities of color may have very specific asks that are different than people that sometimes are work and connected with the work that could be really inspiring, and it could be an opportunity to hear from those communities. I think there are a lot of places of connection, but it's important to know, like, there is also those places of dissent. And the places of dissent is a place of groups. Instead of saying, no, I know what's best for your children, even though I come from a very different ethnic or racial background, is to say, well, let me learn more. Why are you supporting this? And why do you feel that it's important as a learning opportunity? I think the other thing is that we get into the duality of, communities of color want or support restorative justice, but not support something else, because we always think of support this, so that means that you don't support this other thing that we think is important. And that is also this deficit mindset that we get into around the ways in which communities of color and predominantly white organizations like ours end up supporting and connecting about the work. So I just wanted to use this opportunity to talk about the way in which we navigate the racialization of our school district, in particular when we talk about the large number of students of color that we're serving, and then people think that we are all on the same page. And this slide illustrates that, no, sometimes we're not, and it's good to hear when we're not, and for folks to really hear and learn from that. So thank you so much for that.
Gideon.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Kelly. I just want to highlight that we absolutely heard an emphasis for more arts programming and funding in multiple of our feedback sessions. And so just requesting here in this space that we make that an area of focus in either work group going forward, as well as our recruitment and retaining techniques in terms of further diversifying our staff.
Agreed. I think some really exciting opportunities out of ESSER 3 potentially arising. So good news there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I just had a quick question on the Reimagining Classrooms funding for the $4 million. Can you clarify again? I understand how the Big Ideas campaign is taking place and how that selection process. How are we deciding where the $4 million is getting invested in the schools for reimagining the different spaces?
Yeah, so Lee, who you heard from the Big Ideas on the instructional piece, is working on that with schools now. So it's a similar process on a maybe smaller scale, in that our schools are submitting kind of a good creative ideas through Lee, and then Lee is working with the same kind of cross-functional team to kind of grant awards to each of the classrooms, pretty broad breadth of schools, touching a lot of the schools with different ideas across different schools, in hopes that then we can encourage more and more investments into the classroom space and into the outdoor classroom space, both with schools budgets and with the overall budget moving forward. So it's a similar concept to piloting a good number of ideas to see what is really working for kids for further expansion, hopefully into ESSER 3 again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ollie.
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge the investment we're making in menstrual equality. And in part, I want to acknowledge that work was brought to this board and brought to this administration directly from young people, by an organization that's facilitated entirely by young people. So Maggie, Anita, Amira, all the young who have Bleed Shamelessly, if you're watching this, this is your work come to life that brought this to the attention of the board, that brought this to the attention of the administration, and we are now making a $200,000 investment in menstrual equality because of your voice. So there are young people out there who are wondering if you can impact the way our district works. The answer is absolutely yes, and for the better. This isn't a conversation that we would have had without you. The other thing I want to say is that we're having this conversation that's happening across the country in terms of diversity of staff. Districts everywhere are saying we want to employ more people of color. We see the benefits for students. We see the benefits for our community, which means this is a really competitive moment to try to attract teachers of color. And we can't approach teachers of color with any sense of entitlement. We have to have a conversation about what makes Madison a great place to be a teacher, what makes Madison a great place to work, and what makes Madison a place that supports and uplifts the leadership of educators of color. And so we can't detach the conversation about recruitment and retention from the quality of environment we are producing here for our young people and for our staff. And that needs to be something that we're fully invested in. And I think there's a little bit of a disjointed dialogue around wanting folks to be here and what it means to support folks in being here. And I hope that as we continue to have this conversation and have this conversation in an expansive way, we recognize that we have to connect those dots. That's all for my comments, Chris. Thank you.
I want to amplify all these comments. Had a nice discussion with a teacher of color who unfortunately is leaving Madison, and his reasons for leaving, and I found that very enlightening on why. And I strongly suggest that people have those conversations, and they can be uncomfortable. And I wish him well, and I only wish we could have kept it. but I know it has to be a whole societal shift. Can't be just one thing.
I just have one question, Kelly. I have a curiosity about the attendance area social workers that we're adding, the 3 additional people. So the current memorial area attendance area social worker is based in the community. And I'm curious if the other 3 social workers, or possibly all 4, will continue to be based in the community, or if we're shifting these positions to schools. I'm kind of wondering where we're headed programmatically with this investment.
Yeah, I think I'm going to invite Jay, who I believe is on tonight. Jay, if you're here, would you mind taking your screen off?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Chris, great question. I think, especially throughout the pandemic, we saw an incredible need for our social workers to collaborate within our feeder patterns and partnering intensely with our community partners. We know that will continue, and it's led to new ways of working that we hope to continue across MMSD in all feeder patterns and in all community spaces. And so our intention is to use our existing community-based social work position and these 3 new positions in similar ways, to take what we've learned through Amy Noble's efforts in the memorial feeder pattern and from all that we gained in terms of partnerships with community, our community assets throughout the pandemic, to try to make some of those things more systematic moving forward. We also know that with our schools having reopened and heading into next school year, that our school-based social workers will be, ever more focused on what's happening at school and wanting to have some additional attention from social workers in the community. That does not necessarily mean that they can function independent of our schools. We have a number of roles within MMSD that are charged with partnering and managing partnerships and those connections and making sure that we're in sync with all of our community resources. And so, though community-based, they will also be closely associated with schools, and in many cases working directly with our school-based social workers, but the intention is for them to be focused on the community.
That's good to hear. I know we've gotten positive feedback about that model, and I hope to see that good work continue. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
All right, I think we can move on, Kelly.
All right, I'm going to ask Jorge and Lachelle to come up on stage here and show their camera. And Barb, we're going to go on to the slide that starts with the teacher mentoring slide. There you go, our beautiful kids. Go ahead, Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. Buenas tardes todos. Good evening, all. Actually, it's my pleasure to introduce Lachelle Fisher, who's our Director of Professional Learning and leads the mentoring and induction work in MMSD. She's going to be walking us through these next couple of slides. Couple things, though, before she jumps into the slides. Lachelle actually started in our work in our department as a mentor and knows firsthand the impact a mentor can have in supporting our new staff and overall retention. So I'm really excited for her to share the next couple of slides with you. Lachelle.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, Chris, and board members for hearing from me tonight. And Kelly and Jorge, your collaboration and leadership on this topic has been essential. As Jorge said, my name is Lachelle Fisher, and I currently serve as your Director of Professional Learning. And as Jorge said, I had the great privilege of serving on the first team of full-time new educator mentors back in 2014, which was made possible at that time by the Forward Madison partnership with UW-Madison and the generosity of CUNA Mutual Group. We had a great grant that let us begin that program in that way. And I'm honored to lead the current iteration of the work, including making adjustments and continuing to center equity for both our teachers and our kids. I've seen firsthand the impact of dedicated trained mentors on the success of teachers and kids. And there's more data linked into your appendix on this topic that you can dig into. And so you should know our current state. We currently have 4.5 positions for full-time mentors, and those 4.5 people are mentoring over 100 beginning year 1 teachers, which puts these mentors way over the recommended ratio of 15 teachers for every mentor. We provide mentoring for year 1 teachers, and we're excited tonight to pursue an opportunity to expand this service to meet the needs of all of our year 1 and year 2 teachers in MMSD. We also know our teachers of color, and Barb, you can stay on the first one for just a second, thank you. We also know our teachers of color, specifically Black teachers, bilingual teachers, and special education teachers are most likely to leave the profession, and we are focusing our efforts on providing specific supports for these teachers. Additionally, students that are Black and Latinx are more likely nationwide and of course locally to have new teachers. And we know very well that student success in MMSD is currently predictable when we know the race of our students. And this is one effort I truly believe can change this outcome. A recent report by the New Teacher Center, which I have and can share, discusses a successful induction model that includes at least 2 years of a new teacher's career, focusing on a combination of pedagogy, environment, teacher mindset, and practice. And here in MMSD, we ensure that that also includes a focus on anti-racism and equity. So you can see in front of you here on your slide an outline of our project description. We have a training program ready for our mentors, which we piloted a version of this school year, training 10 mentors at 9 schools. 8 of our 10 mentors this year who piloted this program are teachers of color. 6 of these 10 mentors are bilingual. This is the necessary representation of our student body that's going to make a difference for our new teachers and our kids. Feedback from the mentors and their beginning teachers showed success, even in the mostly virtual multiple pandemic year that we have had. Our goal here in this proposal is to build capacity in our staff, both the veteran teachers as mentors and our beginning teachers. We aim to empower teachers with the skills and access to serve one another. And so our mentors will be teachers with demonstrated success with students, especially students of color, English learners, and students with IEPs. They will be teachers who embody anti-racism and advocacy. They'll be teachers who are natural leaders within their building. And we aim to empower teachers of color, bilingual teachers, and special education teachers as leaders and mentors without removing them from their classrooms. They would mentor one beginning teacher and they would continue to serve our students as well. And you can go ahead to the next slide, Barb. Thank you. We know that the student impact from mentoring is real and measurable. We know that students can gain up to 5 additional months of learning over 3 years when they work with a trained mentor. And we also know that retention is increased with instructional mentoring, up to 31%, and more so when we intentionally partner mentors and beginning teachers based on need, content, identity, experience, level, and other factors. It's not a pairing process of numbers, it's a pairing process of humans. And that is one component of the program that is vital to our new teachers and really important to me. As we talk with our new educators, they consistently name mentoring as one of the most impactful parts of their first year of teaching, and they ask for a second year to continue to dig into the work with a mentor. We have not had the capacity to mentor for another year since 2015, when our need began to exceed our capacity. We've also worked really closely with MTI to continue to support teachers, and that will continue. And so you can see in front of you the numbers, and I want to focus on the impact that this program will have. And so there's 2 big impacts from this. First, student-centered, instructional-focused, anti-racist mentoring means an increase in student achievement, which I had already mentioned. It means that mentors and teachers create environments that recognize the brilliance of their students and also have the instructional skills to ensure student success. And second, of course, teacher retention, which we've spoken to a few times already this evening. This year, we hired over 230 new teachers to join MMSD. If after 3 years, we've retained 70% of them, our current rate of retention over 3 years, it means that we will have lost 69 of those teachers, or more than 20 each year. The highest turnover of our new hires is our beginning educators, those new to the profession in their first couple of years. We also know that teachers of color, bilingual teachers, and special education teachers represent disproportionate numbers when it comes to that retention. And so increasing that retention in MMSD would have a significant impact on who we get to retain as teachers and an impact on the relationships those teachers get to have with students, and therefore increase our student achievement as well. So the proposal you see has 3 components: training, substitute teachers, and compensation for mentors. And you saw on the previous slide some of the components that I would ensure are part of this process as our teacher leaders here learn to mentor our beginning teachers. With this proposal, we can guarantee a mentor for every year 1 and year 2 teacher in MMSD, and we would aim to increase our teacher retention by 30% over 3 years, and specifically focusing, of course, on teachers who mirror the demographics of our student population. I will pause here. Kelly or Jorge, if you have anything to add, and Chris, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Lachelle. The one thing I wanted to say, before we get to any questions, is that this also really shifts the work of induction and mentoring into the buildings, and it really then becomes a part of everyone's. So everyone's supporting our brand new educators. And that is something that we know also has a lot of success as you onboard and induct new staff. Having that sense of belonging within your school is also really critical as we think through this. So appreciate that again, Lachelle, for going through those slides, and the board for listening.
Thank you, Jorge.
So I hadn't planned a pause point here, but does anybody have any clarifying questions at this point? I think you have more detailed comments about mentoring. Maybe hang on to them until the end. I can wait. Okay, yeah, great. All right, let's keep going then, Kelly. Thank you so much,
Awesome.
Jorge.
Great job, Jorge. Great job, Lachelle. So proud of you guys. This is really exciting work. All right, so we'll take it home to the finish line here on the next slide, Barb. We have gone through our board amendment process, and because of the adjustments that we just had an opportunity to walk you through, we've been able to really clear any board amendments with the potential exception of this one in front of you, which Chris will present as it's Chris's proposal. I will summarize that kind of going into the amendment process, our unallocated was at an 8.0 FTE. And during that process, the budget team was doing the final reconciling, which always happens this time of year. All the final I's are dotted, T's are crossed, which allowed us to identify an additional 1.9 FTE. So at this point, the unallocated, which is in the budget book you have in your hands right now, is at 9.9 FTE, or virtually 2 more unallocated teacher positions that we previously did not have in the budget. So we're super excited about that adjustment. And Chris, you can kind of talk about your adjustment from there. Thank you.
Yeah, so this amendment grew from a number of different forces I thought work in the budget. First, we redirected some of our unallocated positions into the virtual schools, which we needed to do. We are losing FTE at Memorial and La Follette, despite fairly stable enrollment projections, very small losses, and not gaining FTE at East despite projected enrollment increases. And at the same time, after talking to leaders in schools, we're looking at a situation where we actually have 2 grades going into middle schools and high schools this year in a transition year, not just 1 grade. Because of the hybrid model and the later start for our middle schools, in reality, our 6th and 7th graders and our 9th and 10th graders are going to be going through pretty significant transitions to middle school and high school next year. And so I heard some concern on the part of leaders that it would be good to have the potential to add staffing if we need it, to ensure that students in those grades who are making the transitions, and we want to ensure their success, have the support they need, and that we can be responsive to enrollment. So that was what inspired me to put in this request, to add 2 additional unallocated positions. It doesn't necessarily we're going to need them. It doesn't mean we'll need them. Again, this is about being responsive to enrollment, but if it appears that having some extra positions, particularly at the secondary level, will help to ensure the success of kids transitioning back into unfamiliar school environments, meet their social and emotional and academic needs. I just wanted to make sure that we budgeted to have that flexibility. I'm really grateful that Kelly was able to find 1.9 FTE in the budget. That's like pretty much the same thing as what I asked for. And so I'm feeling good at this point about where we're at in terms of the unallocated teacher pool. But because this is important, I just wanted to put it out there for people to comment on and discuss, see if there was agreement that this is a good use of our resources. Nikki.
Before you guys were on the board, I'm gonna go with the yes, I'm the old what here, so type thing. Yes, we're all you young whippersnappers said, so I gotta say that once. But during that period of time, Leopold had a serious staffing issue. Our Black and Brown, especially our bilingual students, were not getting the staffing, and our special ed students were not getting the staffing, and it reached crisis level to the point that the board had to intervene in order to make that right. I don't want to go through that again, having gone through it once and hearing parents and teachers on the verge of tears and parents in an absolute panic saying, my kid isn't learning, no one can get to him, no one has the time to meet with him. And I don't want to see that again. If that can be avoided, I'm all for it, if we can do it. And those are my comments for that reason,
So my intention is not to have a huge discussion here, but if anybody has comments or concerns about this amendment, please voice them. If not, Kelly, it sounds like process-wise, we don't need to actually amend the budget because you've put the positions in, correct?
That's right. And we track enrollment projections throughout the summer. That is work that this administration does. And so if more enrollment is needed because, we outpace projections, that work will be done through the September and October budgeting process as well. So that is also available for discussion for the board a little bit later on. But thank you, Chris. At this point, we are feeling very good about this budget, and we're also thrilled that we were able to get that extra 1.9 in there.
Any other questions, please? If not, let's keep going.
All right. So last, certainly not least, we have Fund 80 and Fund 50, which is also part of your budgeting approval process. Fund 50 is our community service budget. It is largely MSCR's budget, but it is not solely MSCR. What we're looking at for the theme of Fund 80 is trying to get back to some normalcy in programming and in services. So you will see that we had under levied for our community service fund this last year, knowing that we were not going to be able to provide the same level of commitment to our community for community-based programming. We did reduce those property taxes for community-based programming due to COVID-19, but we're looking to kind of get back to our new normal, which is a revenue similar to what we would have seen in 1920 in this coming budget. On the expenditure side, we are planning for what is likely going to be smaller classes for some of the in-person, indoor, at least for the fall, as we carefully move back into some in-person programming for the fall. We are continuing to budget for additional PPE and other nursing support that we will likely need at least through the summer and fall. So very excited to be moving back towards a new normal for MSCR with lots of lessons learned. MSCR learned a lot of great things about virtual programming, and some of their virtual programs were more successful online than they ever were in person. So you will continue to see both in-person and virtual learning options for the community this fall, which we're super excited about. MSCR also learned a lot of new creative ways to move their programming outside. They used Hoyt Park this year more than ever. So you'll continue to see that outdoor programming and outdoor use of parks through their programming. So lots of good planning efforts built into this budget as they really think creatively about how to serve the community even better moving forward. You will see a negative $850,000. That is a planned change in fund balance. And that is the budget we've set aside for the remodeling of their new location as they move next spring. Moving into next summer, they will also likely have a little bit of fundraising happening, and I mentioned that earlier. attached to that plan as well. So they're excited about that. Lots of good planning work happening. And just another item on the horizon, we are seeing kind of due to the market, like we see with our bus drivers and others, simply not enough people applying for MSR part-time and seasonal after-school positions right now. We have a number of open vacant positions. That is really kind of a hard place to be for us right now moving into the summer. And we do think that our pay rate for our hourly seasonal staff is something that needs to be looked at. So this is just a little bit of a foreshadowing for some great work the team is currently working on and a proposal that is likely to come to you either this fall for actual implementation or this coming fall/winter for the 22-23 school year as they do pay rate analysis across the county to validate where we fall and how we can better attract more and more staff to run these fantastic programs. So more to come on Fund 80. On Fund 50, that is our food service program. We are excited to say, next slide, Barb, to say that we have narrowed the expected gap that we had for our food service program, serving over 1 million meals into the community. We've relied on our federal funds to really make that work. And we've relied on the ingenuity of our food service team, which is not to be underestimated. That team is incredible and has taken a number of expense saving moves to balance their budget. By the time you see their budget for June end of year balances, I suspect they may still need a little bit of Fund 10 transfer or a little bit of fund balance use, but nowhere near where we might have been afraid of in January. So less than $200,000 in the red. And considering where we were for this year, that's a great place for them to be. And we want to thank them for that. 21-22, looking forward, again, we are excited to get back towards a new normal. We are budgeting for students to be in person. We're budgeting for adults to be eating our lunches again and students eating our lunches again. And we're incredibly thankful for the federal government, which comes out of the USDA bills, an increase in the federal reimbursement rate for food. And already legislation that has passed increasing or continuing the flexibility coming out of COVID-19 for the eligibility rates into 21-22. Both of those things are very, very good news, not only for our food service budget, but they're very good news for solving some of the inequity problems that come with kind of food service coming from home, paying for food. And so we've got a lot of really good things happening in the food service world. So this is the summary of the Fund 50 budget. On the horizon with them, come this September or October, we are hopeful that the food service team can come present to you in an upcoming operation work group around the food service vision for the future. So we have our new Cedric Hodo here leading the food service team. And they are excited to talk to you this fall about some of their vision coming forward. But this budget, we think, is set really well to self-balance for the 21-22 school year. Next slide, Barb. Property tax forecast, that is. We have a couple new estimates built into the budget book that is in your hand. The main one being our equalized tax base has been certified coming out of the city of Madison at 6.3%. So that has been included in the current property tax forecast. Included in that is also the new construction growth, which is good news through COVID-19 that we're seeing new construction, but we're also seeing continuous increases in the price of homes. So while our mill rate has significantly decreased to the lowest it's been in many, many years at $10.87, down a 26-cent mill rate because of that tax base, we're also seeing home values continue to rise, which keeps the average homeowner calculation for tax impact about stable with what we saw in April, down just a little bit to $114 for the estimated tax impact. We do continue to hope that this will fall by October. But at this point, this is our best estimate of what taxes will look like come next January. So with that, Barb, I think, do we have a next step slide? And next steps, June, you'll be voting, of course, as you know, on June 28th. July is when we hope to receive that final state budget. And then we'll come back to you in September and October with estimates, impacts, and plans around that state budget. And as we learn more about general aid, private school vouchers, independent charter impacts through October, we'll continue to keep you in the loop and ready you for an October 25th budget. I want to thank each and every one of you for a really strong budget season. This board continues to put in very, very positive, good, strategic forethought into this budget. And I think it shows in what is an incredibly strong budget and in line with every bit of feedback we're getting from the community. So congratulations to each of you on a strong, balanced budget. And I'm done with my presentation. I'll take any following questions.
Thank you, Kelly. Before we dive into questions, I want to give Melinda a moment to speak. I haven't been able to see her on the screen, but she texted Barb that she wants to be able to say a few words about the foundation. And then I also want to make sure that Nama, who I can't see on the screen, Nama, if you have any questions, I want to let you go first. So, Melinda, are you there?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to fill you in about what we know on June 21st. A couple of times board members have referred to a press conference. And indeed, that is the Wisconsin Public Education Network statewide day of action. Tim Lamons and I are part of a group that are pulling together a 10 a.m. press conference on Monday, June 21st, State Street Steps at the state capitol. This is not just a Madison effort. We have invited all districts in Dane County so that we have a united front of school officials, our elected representatives, grumps. We've invited one of our local business leaders so that we have a really great program with different voices represented. I sent some information through Barb Osborne to the full board. I had a chance to talk to President Muldrow about this, and I'll continue to stay in touch with you as we finalize the details. But definitely look for a press event again, Monday, June 21st at the state capitol, 10 o'clock. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Melinda. It's so important to advocate for the budget our children deserve, and I appreciate your bringing this to our attention. Nama, before we move on, did you have any questions or comments you wanted to bring forward?
Should go to the 7 o'clock meeting.
Oh, okay.
So she's
Not
gonna
here.
be watching YouTube.
Okay. Open it up to the group for questions, comments, anything we've discussed up to this point. Ollie.
Yeah, I want to thank Kelly and the team for working on this preliminary budget, and really hearing the voices of our community and the voices of this board, and centering equity, and prioritizing our young people throughout this conversation. I am incredibly excited by what we've been able to achieve with this budget, particularly the launch of full day 4K, which I don't think any of us can emphasize enough. I think there are so many things about this budget that we are proud of, but I think, we have to navigate this budget as a moral guide to kind of our future as a district. And so I think being attached to the outcomes we expect this budget to produce is something I'd like to hear our staff speak to. And Dr. Jenkins, I'm gonna aim that at you. What will it mean next year as we are recovering from the pandemic, and what will it mean next year as we're launching full day 4K and seeing this shift in the way that we invest and our ability to prioritize equity? What are the outcomes we anticipate this budget will be able to produce?
Thank you so much for that too, Chair Ali. I think all of the things that we've laid out in terms of our strategic priority, as you said, they're reflected here in our budget. So when we think about, first of all, starting off with the full day 4K, we see an expansion. We're actually 50% of our bottom 10% of schools will have the full day 4K, which is a significant increase of what it has been in the past. When we think about how we want to be on our journey as an anti-racist district, the training that we're going to be seeing, that we're going to continue to do, the building upon some of the knowledge that we have now, but we're just trying to get better as people. We're going to see our children, when we start talking about our core values in terms of belonging, seeing that more, even within this budget tonight, that was pretty big. When we think about the whole idea that we invested $200,000 to address some of the concerns that came to us from some of our students, their voices being lifted in this work.
Dr. Jenkins?
Can you hear me?
We're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you due to some background noise.
Okay.
And so I don't want to take away from the importance of what you're saying, especially as you speak to kind of directly the benefits of full day 4K and our expansion in early childhood learning.
Right.
This is the first time we've expanded a full day grade since 1992. So I want to make sure that we hear what you're saying.
Okay, no doubt. Let me try to move so I can get to an area which you can hear me clearly, though. But thank you. You were just regurgitating something that I had said. I'm in a spot right now, and I'll try to get to where I can be a little bit more be clear here for you. If someone else wants to start right there, I'm having to move so I can get to you. Okay.
I'm not sure where he is or how he's hooked up.
Chris, if you want to navigate to somebody else's question, I can come back.
Yeah, maybe we'll put this on pause, and does anybody else have a comment or question? Ananda?
Yeah, I wanted to go back, and I'm hoping that Lachelle is too, with us, and, on Zoom. Because this work around, mentorship and induction is a long time work. Hi, I can see you now. So I was hoping, so one of the things that I've been thinking about and noticing since we have proclaimed to be an anti-racist district is that the sentiment and the word, the terminology has been used in many scenarios, and I really appreciate Board President Ali Muldrow at the last meeting really calling out and wanting us to be cautious in how we utilize that word. But I'm very familiar with the work that you've been building over the course of many years. I'm hoping that you could speak to what does it look like anti-racist teaching? What should we be like noticing when anti-racist teaching is happening in a classroom? And what is anti-racist mentoring? And I was hoping that you can give us a couple of practical examples so we know, so we can kind of, have a visual of what that looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Ananda, for that question. And I appreciate your reference back to Ali's caution in the previous board meeting, because I think it is really vital that we put into practice the words that we say. I think it's part of who we need to be as a district, and it's part of who our students deserve. And so thank you for that. I will answer a little bit how we embody anti-racism through mentoring, and then I will pass it off to Jorge to speak a little bit more about the how we observe anti-racist practices, as that's some of the work that he's been really digging into as well. One of the examples that I will share is of our pilot this year. I mentioned that we trained 10 new mentors this year, and that 8 of those mentors are teachers of color, 6 of those mentors are bilingual. And the training that we experienced through the new teacher center, while they've made great strides in focusing on equity, it's still a very formulaic and white-centered training. And one thing that we did this year is we had an intentional sort of series of conversations and trainings with our 10 new mentors to anticipate what the trainings were going to be like, to debrief them, to talk about how the skills and strategies that we might be learning can be applied in our setting in MMSD with our staff sort of embodying themselves as mentors. I'm not interested in our mentors following a formula to connect with our new teachers and teach them. I'm interested in them connecting with each other as humans and paying attention to strengths and brilliance and identity so that we can best serve our kids in that same way. And so we went through this cycle of ensuring that our mentors felt the same sense of belonging and empowerment that we expect our kids to feel. It's one example, Ananda, and it is one of many ways that I am working to be intentional. I also, although I've said a lot of words tonight, spend a lot of time with my mentors, listening and learning. As a white educator, I know my view and my experience is part of the majority, and I've been very privileged in that. And so I expect to continue learning from our mentors and our students and our teachers so that I can better lead that work as well. Jorge, will you speak to the other piece?
Sure. Thank you, Ananda, for that question. So two things I wanted to lift up in terms of what does it look like in a classroom, this idea of anti-racist teaching. One is I believe that it's definitely a mindset, and it's a shift in mindset about our students and what we believe to be true about our students, particularly our Black and Brown students, right? In their brilliance, in the assets that they bring. Secondly, I believe it's seen through culturally responsive teaching practices. So for us to say anti-racist practices, it's really lifting up what I believe is centered in our culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. So again, if we want to go deeper in that, what does that look like? Well, it looks like many ways. One, and something that's been brought up overall in the past couple of our board meetings and instructional work groups, is that it's having high standards. It's also teaching standards. It's holding high expectations through the standards, through having that level of understanding. It's also in how we're connecting with children. It's how we're bringing in their lives. It's how we're really empowering and providing them opportunities to bring their wealth of knowledge into the space, into the learning space. And so there are many parts to this, but I would definitely say that for me, it's how I see it. It's that mindset and that shift in mindset about what we believe about our youth and our young people, and what they bring to the table, their families and what they bring to the table, and the communities and what they bring to the table. Seeing it through brilliance and assets, and this idea of really uplifting culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices.
Thank you so much.
Got back connected now. Can you hear me?
All right.
Okay, I think I left off there when I was talking about the full day 4K programs in terms of that expansion, in terms of what we see and what everyone's going to see. But when we started talking about the anti-racist piece of it, when I walked in the district, I recall us having this discussion because we're on a journey. And I think people are going to see us continue to be on a journey. We're not there yet. I don't want anyone to even begin to think that we're there yet in terms of the mind shift that we have to have in the language that we're using towards our students. It's just a true fact that as we begin to uncover who we are and what we are, we have to do it as a district. We have to do it systematically, and we have to think about this whole thing of being anti-racist and what it means. And it means going beyond just dealing with the truth and the history behind the conception of America itself and America's education. But we have to center our children, and not just our African-American children, but we have to center all children. We will see how we reach out to our children, as we just did, and I mentioned earlier about our students who may be LGBTQ, AI, transgender. We're going to see us pushing the policies as you have stood together and signed those resolutions. They're going to feel that when they come to our schools next year. I think they'll begin to feel a sense of belonging, and that's for all of our children. I think in terms of how we're going to do our early literacy, we're all focusing on letters now. You started survey results in terms of the focus group saying, hey, this is a way to go. We want to see this reflected in our district, that our children can do something that hasn't been done across the country in terms of systematically having all children exposed to high quality literacy early on and beyond. We talk about being anti-racist. One of the first things to break in the anti-racist environment, or promote an anti-racist environment, is to educate all of our children at high levels. Those are a few of the things we see, but then also in our hiring practices, when we start thinking about currently our data in terms of what it looks like before us, you heard again from the surveys, individuals saying to us clearly, we want you to have our staff be reflective of our district, of our community, of our children. So you're going to see a strong effort next year in terms of us doing that as well. And I'll say to you guys, I'm having some serious technical difficulties because I'm not in my space. I'm out of town right now. But right there, I'll just stop right there. There are many other things that I think that we're still on a journey, and we can't necessarily say that everything will be done next year, but we will see our students coming back after the pandemic, us focusing in on the social emotional, the mental health piece. That's critical. We are not out of this pandemic. We're merging towards the new phase of it, but we're not out of it. And I think we're gonna have to be very intentional when we come back. And I think that we will feel and see that not only in our students, but in our staff when we come back. And I'll stop right there for the sake of time. I know others may have other things to say.
No, thank you.
Other comments, questions? Kelly, I did have one question about ESSER. So I'm hoping that we can advocate for our kids and get the funding that they deserve from the federal government and that our state legislature will come through. Should they not, should for some horrible reason we not get ESSER 3 funds and we need to get all that we need to get out of federal funding out of ESSER 2, has there been any conversation about putting some of what we're planning to spend on ESSER 2 on pause until we have more certainty around ESSER 3?
So no, there has not at this moment at any kind of granular detail. Certainly we've looked as an internal team of which projects start sooner, which projects start later. For example, this is just a loose example. Jorge and Lachelle just presented to you. They can scale up and scale down their proposal if they needed to. Not that anyone would want them to, right? That's the difference. But if needed, they could scale the mentoring a bit different and perhaps come back with a different plan if they had to. There's a number of projects in ESSER 2 that we could look at scaling at a different rate. At a different level if we had to. Right now, I mentioned this before, I think the best thing for us to do is plan so that we know if we needed to, where we might adjust. But that would be work the board would discuss and evaluate after the budgeting process is done at the state level, after we get answers from the federal government, and certainly in the October timeline when all of our other estimates are coming in, because some estimates might move in our favor, right? And so you'll want to have kind of all the chips available to you by the time you make final decisions. But I certainly think, putting out a priority list right now for ESSER 2 would just be a bit premature. Our teams are doing really good planning work this summer to get ready for fall. And we want that work to continue again, because we want fall to start for students and staff on the best, most important note possible this fall. And until or unless we know otherwise from the state, I think it'd just be premature, but we do know the plans and we do know which ones can scale up or down should we have to be in that stage.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate the commitment to continuing to move forward with our plans and to provide what our kids and our schools need. At the same time, I anticipate we'll be getting some ESSER, probably quite a bit of ESSER 2 spending in the consent agenda in the next few months. And with luck, we'll have a certain state budget. We'll know we're getting ESSER 3, but if we don't, I think it's important to put those consent agenda decisions in the context of what might we have to put on pause if ESSER 3 doesn't come through. So I'm just hoping as we move into summer budget decision making around ESSER 2 spending, it might be helpful to know a little bit more about the plan for the contingency plan for if ESSER 3 doesn't come through, if we're making decisions about ESSER 2 spending. If we're voting on an ESSER 2 expense, do we know that if we approve that, we'll still have the flexibility in ESSER 2 to respond if ESSER 3 doesn't work out?
Yeah, again, we are still under the belief that we will have a budget from the state by mid-July to end of July, which will give us plenty of time, right, to make adjustments if needed. We'll have a lot more information in just a couple weeks is our hope and expectation.
Thank you for
Chris,
that.
let me just add one thing to that as well. And Kelly's articulated, but I want to make sure I reinforce. We want to be stable moving into the fall. And right now, with our current funding, with even the projections of what the Joint Finance Committee is doing, we want to be ready for the fall. Our impact on ESSER 2, and then even the following year, we will really even know that because the estimates will be realized, as you said, when we start talking about around October. So for that next year's budget, that's what we would be really concerned about. And scenario planning must take place, yes, but I just want to caution us too in getting too far, jumping too far ahead of doing too much of what we may not do, because it could destabilize us mentally. It could be very depressing to even just get too far ahead of ourselves.
Any other comments, questions? I would advise folks that if you have questions between now and the June 28th budget vote, please reach out to Dr. McGregory with your questions and he'll get an answer for you and hopefully share the answers with the full board. And Kelly, we will see you again on June 28th for our vote and any final questions we might have at that time. Thank you, Kelly, for this really great presentation. Likewise, everyone who spoke, Jorge, Lachelle, Dr. Jenkins, for your good feedback. I just want to thank everybody for getting us to the point where I think we're in really good shape to vote on our draft preliminary budget in 2 weeks.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Let's move on to our final agenda item, which is a discussion about proposed changes to Board Policy 6601, which is our policy on funds transfer. At some point, we will be voting on suggested changes to this policy, possibly in June, possibly later. I think Kelly and the team are going to give us a brief presentation about the proposed changes. And I want folks to think about two different aspects of this as we listen to the presentation. The first is the content and the context. Do you have questions about the reason for these revisions and about the proposed changes themselves? And secondly, please be thinking about the process. What are your thoughts on the process and the timeline for voting on these changes? And consider the process in the larger context of the board's process for reviewing policy and the role of Sabian and Chris, who are our policy team. So I think the way I'm going to facilitate this is after the presentation, just do a quick round robin around the room to get people's feedback on those two aspects, both the content and the process of this proposed budget or this proposed policy change. So with that in place, Kelly, I hand it over to you.
Yeah, Barbara, can I ask you to lower the slides for us? You all have in your packet a redlined policy. Sherry, before I jump off or before I jump in, is there anything you wanted to add? I don't want to take any talking points away.
No, there's nothing I need to add right now, Kelly. Thanks.
All right. All right. So policy 6061 is in your packet for consideration. We are presenting for you tonight our best thinking around a much overdue revision to policy 6061. This policy has been long overdue for an update. Back in 2013, I was on a team who requested that this policy be moved forward with red line updates. And since then, this policy has not actually been calendared for revision. The policy itself was written in 2003. Many items have changed, not only at DPI, but here in the Madison School District, which help us to update this policy for your consideration since it has not been updated since 2003. First of all, a key item to note is that we, in the budget office, this is one of the guiding procedures that really address our work. It's a very technical policy written by a non-technical team back in 2003. So it's a policy that we take near and dear to implement. And we take that role very seriously. Happen to be kind of a black and white crew in the budgeting office, and we take compliance incredibly seriously. So we want a policy that works for us and a policy that works for you. And to that extent, we take the purpose by which a board puts money into the budget for incredibly seriously, as it relates to these deep conversations that we have around the budget. We just had one of them tonight when we talked about the Bleed Shamelessly effort, for example. We know exactly what you've put that money aside to do, and we have the plans of the student. So by putting that money into the budget, we know the purpose, we know the plans, as supported of the materials in tonight's board meeting, which are on record and noted by Barb in her notes. Tell us what to do and how to manage those funds. But what you see in this policy is that it was kind of written a long time ago, and it controls the budget management process, which is the work we take seriously to manage our budget throughout the year. And this policy is such that we can't really do our best work for you and still be in compliance with the budget. So for example, in line A right there, which is a line item out, it says transfer funds, transfer between funds. Within those funds, there's really only a legal one way to do it, Fund 10 into other budgets, but you cannot go 80 into 10. 50 into 10. You can't do, the board cannot vote on transfers like that. This policy actually suggests that you can. So that is not literally against the state statute, for example. Other items that are in here, for example, is that this policy in the past has been interpreted and questioned as to what we can and cannot provide DPI on our ongoing budgets. So to date, we do not submit a mid-year budget or an end-of-year budget to the DPI because of this policy and because of triggering this policy. When in fact, what this does is it causes our estimates from DPI to be inaccurate. And that is the reason, this policy is the reason our state aid estimates are wrong, not only here in Madison, but our effects of other school districts on the July 1 aid estimate and in our special education aid estimates are largely because we don't go through the traditional budget update process through DPI. So we wanted to add language that makes it incredibly clear that we can work with DPI and with our data without triggering a theoretical new budget with the board. Some examples of why this policy is not necessarily a good user policy, which requires us a lot of extra workarounds, might be, for example, a couple of years ago, you put in the budget, a staff budget for wellness, a very good proposal. When we put it into play based on the planning itself, it was put with the wellness team in our physical education department. Throughout the year, as the planning progressed, those funds, the work behind the funds moved over to Jay and the student services where the restorative justice work was happening. The funds also moved into HR, where a lot of the partnership work was happening around wellness for adults and wellness for staff. But this policy made it such that we wouldn't be transferring the money to the department that was actually implementing the work. That causes us some internal control problems because the people who should be approving the budget, spending the money, and signing the invoices for payment should be the team that's implementing the work because they know, in fact, if the services were delivered. And without the ability to move funds between department to the owner of which is responsible as the work progresses throughout the year, limits our abilities for internal controls. So I've kind of said a lot in a short period. I am happy to answer questions at this point. I just wanted to present some examples as to why this policy wasn't quite working for our team. Thank you, Chris, for letting me have opening remarks.
Thank you, Kelly. Before we go around and do comments, I'm going to leave it off just to kind of model the types of feedback that might come up. So in terms of content, I think this is a good change. I think there's a lot of stuff in here that needs to be changed. My one concern with the content is transparency. If the board is not voting on budget transfers, then it seems like we might need to get some reporting on what's happening with budget transfers between departments if they're not voted on. And so I think taking some time to talk about what that reporting might look like so that it's transparent to the board and also not onerous on staff might be worth it, just to add a little bit of language about reporting. In terms of the process, I know that we talked about voting on this at the June 28th meeting. And at the same time, Chris and Sabian, our policy team, haven't really had a chance to sit down and talk about this with Sherry and digest it and give their feedback to the board about this piece of policy that the board owns. So I would actually like to put out there that maybe we should postpone this vote until July so that our board policy team has a chance to look it over and do that, and also that we're modeling the process we want to use to address policy issues such as this one moving forward. I'm going to let Chris and Sabian comment first on this, just to see if you agree with that and what your thoughts are. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. I guess process-wise, I would agree that it would be nice, you know, and there's been a lot of moving pieces as we enter the end of this year. So I understand wanting to change a policy that's unwieldy and is not actually functioning very well for our staff for a lot of different reasons. But process-wise, I would like to make sure that we have a process for if the policy is coming, a change request from board members or a change request from staff, that it does go through policy committee first. And also that there's you know, more information explaining sort of in writing in advance why we need to make these policy changes and what the impact is going to be. Yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on that. And again, I would agree with the idea that if there's another way to have the oversight or to have more discussions about, you know, if funds are going to move, like how we would be able to see that, or if there is another place we would be able to look for that. I think that would be good too.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you, and Natalie and Kelly and your team for doing this really technical work. I would agree that, you know, it's like, as experts in the field, you have adjusted the policy so that it is reflective of state law. I do think that the concerns about how do we make this transparent for the sake of oversight are, you know, legit. I can recall there have been a few times where we have made transfers within the budget, and we've just kind of informally talked about them in a work group meeting. But how do we put that in a policy just to ensure that practice continues going forward? Because the budget process is very intensive and we have to engage both sides. So, you know, if we can sit down with Sherry and Kelly to talk about how do we write that oversight language into the adjustment, it looks good going forward.
Holly, did you need that?
Yeah, I think I fall into alignment with a lot of what you're saying, Chris, and what you opened up with in terms of, you know, recognizing the need for adjustment here, especially to be in compliance with state statute. I appreciate Chris and Sabian talking to the greater work we want to do as a board around policy. I do feel cautious around, you know, what does it mean for us to look at this individual process and this individual policy and adjust it in real time to be more effective as a board, and what it means to have a larger policy conversation as a board, which is something that I think we need to do. And I think, you know, looking to Chris and Sabian is one thing we need to do as a board, but I also think building in time to board retreats to really analyze and audit our policies is something that we as a governing body can take greater responsibility for. And so I appreciate this update. I appreciate the team for bringing it forward. And I do think that there's a larger conversation around both the process we want to use to ensure transparency around this individual policy, and also an analysis of our entire body of board policy. So I'm grateful for this as a launch pad for both the larger conversation, and I see the necessity in this conversation and this specific policy. I do want to ask that before we vote on this, whether it be in July or at the end of June, that we see this articulated, see the adjustments to this policy and articulated to us in a memo attached, so that we're able to speak to it and have kind of a greater understanding moving forward as a board, in terms of making this decision effectively. That's it for me.
Vivian.
Yeah, thank you. I just really want to echo what what Board Chair Ali just said, in terms of how we can use the retreats, where I know that members of the leadership team and administration have a lot of suggestions in terms of how we can adjust our policy to better serve kids and be in compliance with state law. If we have a section of our retreat where we dedicate X amount of time to evaluate those adjustments that staff and senior leaders bring up, I think that would be a really good method of engagement and to build the board's understanding of policy.
Vicki, you're up next.
Yep. In regards to the board retreat, I'm going to go backwards, start with what Savion said. I happen to be in agreement with Ali and Savion with one exception, and that is, can we please have either a sign language interpreter or to save a Zoom copy so that people can access the material afterwards who are deaf or hard of hearing, who are not able to, because we don't have proper interpretation if it's not videoed. That's my only request.
So I think that gets us a little off of notice, but I completely hear what you're saying and think that's incredible feedback, Nikki. And I'm happy to talk about it with you further in terms of coordination. I think it moves us outside of the realm of the meeting.
Understood.
Thank you.
The rest of what I'm planning on saying is as follows. One, you can't have a statute that violates state law. That I understand. Two, I don't think we should vote on it in June. One, because I think the board does need a memo and does use the explanation, and I would like to see it in writing. And this isn't a trust issue at all. I do trust my board. Always have, always will. I trust people. The problem is as an attorney, when I don't have things in writing, it's very hard to go back and use it in court as principle, so it's very hard for me to go back and cite it as an example. That's why I think we need it in writing and explained in that manner. Therefore, I think we should vote in July. I think that the principle should be in writing, and I think we should explain what the changes are and work on it with our policy team. But I don't want to go before our policy team has had a chance to evaluate the policy. We created a team to have policy experts. These are the two policy experts that we have chosen. If we are to trust their work and give them any credence in their work, which I believe we should, then they should have ample time to review said documents. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Nikki. Maya?
Yeah, thank you. I was actually going to say something similar to what Ali was saying. I think that this really does get to the larger and broader scope of how are we doing our job as a board. And I mean, we set policies, right, and we review them and update them. So I think it would be very important to get the memo as well as wait to vote as well. And I'm thankful for you to have brought that forward to wait. I do think that it is important for us to have a deeper dive and have something that is in writing, as Nikki said. So yeah, I kind of echo everything that everyone else has said.
Thank you, Maya. Ananda?
Yeah, I really appreciate this line item is being used as an opportunity to talk extensively about our ways in which we revise policy, which my experience has been really reactionary. And I understand that Nikki and I served together my first year. We hardly had an opportunity to meet because we had 500 other meetings happening at the same time. And then, of course, this past year with COVID, we had to do a lot of reactionary policies as well. And that's kind of how it's been our process of just reacting to. I don't want us to do the same with this policy now, okay, we're just reacting to it. But at the same time, I don't want it to be in a way of following state statute. I don't want it to be in a way of
Kelly doing her due diligence job with the budget. So I wanna to pass an honest, sincere question to Kelly, like, does that make any difference if we vote, or what would be the impact if we vote in June or July? I guess that would be my first question.
Yeah. Well, certainly, passing it in July would help set the team up for a strong budget implementation year. That year, of course, starts July 1. So part of the goal with the timing of this policy was to get it in play before the budget year actually starts. It's also, the timing is also tied to really putting the right foundation in place for my predecessor as they come. So that they have the right policy in place to do the work, versus kind of a concern, which is that they need to kind of not only get here and get their feet on the ground, but build up rapport with the board, right? In order for them to even present a policy like this, it's going to take time, trust, and rapport. And so we wanted to at least get this conversation out on the table for discussion and consideration. Ideally for July 1, but if not, kind of just getting this far with this policy is starting to get towards the win we're looking for. So if we can't get a vote in July or in June, that's unfortunate, but the sooner we can get it, then in July would be best served for the entire budget implementation process. If you start getting into fall, you've kind of missed the boat on the budget management implementation, because you set that work up in the summer for the controls and accounting and things for the school year. So the sooner the better, but if not June, certainly July, and then in worst case, August would be within an implementation period.
Thank you so much for Kelly speaking to that. I respect the work that Savion and Chris Schmidt has in regards to being part of the policy committee, so I don't want to what I'm saying is going to be any disrespect, but I wanted to respect also Kelly's work, and I understand that has been our process, is to be sort of this, okay, this is imminent, and we need to go to a vote, and I'm understanding, from what I'm understanding, you would be able to provide us with a memo in June with an explanation of those policy changes, and then answer any further questions people have for a June vote. So I'm good with that part. I think there's also this opportunity for the bigger or the larger conversation around policy that I'm also excited to engage, because I do think that there are, I think in my first year serving, we had a policy around coin tossing, and that's still disturbing me to this day. So thank you, Kelly, for that, and thank you, Chris. So I just want to echo back some of what I heard to make sure I haven't missed anything. I heard pretty clearly that we need a memo. And I think, Sherry, that would be something you would work on, correct? That usually comes from the legal department.
Yes, Chris, I could work on that. Because of the technicality of this particular policy, I would ask that someone from BPA join me in writing it.
Absolutely. Natalie is on here listening tonight, and she and Ross together would be happy to work on that.
So we get a memo working. Chris and Savion would like some time to work together to take a deep dive into this policy and begin to, not only look at this policy, but model the process we might use moving forward with other board policies as a policy team. So I think we need to honor that and give you guys the time that you need to get that done. I heard that loud and clear. The only real content change I heard from folks was adding some language around reporting and transparency. If we're not voting on transfers, then being able to know what transfers happened as a board. So we need to add that. And then I heard very clearly that at our next board retreat, we want to have a policy conversation and an analysis of how we go about reviewing and updating policy as a board. So that's not just about this isolated example, but it's about a broader strategy to address our policy needs and to have a very clear and transparent process moving forward for taking policy and making changes. Did I miss anything in that summary there? That anyone said that's important?
No, you captured that really well, thanks.
I
it's
wanted
okay,
to,
Oh, go ahead.
hi, it's Natalie. I just did want to add real quick, Ross McPherson, who actually is the author of this policy, and it directly affects the work he does day to day. He is also present here in this meeting. He probably will be the one working with Sherry to help rewrite this policy because it is the policy that affects his day-to-day work.
Yep, Sherry, happy to do so, to work with you on that.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you.
I have one more thing to add. I think you captured really well what everyone has shared, so thank you so much. I think my only concern is that I'm not sure when is our next retreat. I don't know if that's scheduled, but I don't want us to hold on to like the next retreat to have a conversation.
No, that's not, yeah, thank you, that's not what I'm suggesting.
Okay,
Thank you.
I wasn't sure, so can we just clarify, like?
No, I think moving this forward as quickly as possible in terms of setting all of us up for success with the information the board needs is what we have to do in terms of this individual process. I do think examining kind of a long-term process so that we can acknowledge the loop that we're a little in terms of the reactivity around policy is something that's necessary. And I also want to speak to the fact that in terms of policy in July, we are going to have to revise and look at our policies that are specific to COVID, right? Because so much is going to change between the end of the 2021 school year and the 21-22 school year, right? So there's going to be some work around policy that we're going to have to do over the summer before we're able to have a more expansive conversation. I just wanted to acknowledge that it seems like we as a board are ready to have a more expansive conversation, and I want to be accountable to that moving forward and say, here's places where we can position that conversation in addition to these.
Yeah, can I just ask Kelly a question really quick? Kelly, is there, we talked about accountability and transparency and adding some sort of language in there. Is there something that already exists that would allow us to see what we're talking about?
Yeah, so thank you. I was certainly thinking through that, hearing your feedback, taking some notes. What comes to mind is we already provide for the board a quarterly financial comparison of kind of a year by year basis. So I think perhaps there's a cycle that already exists through the quarterly financial cycle that is the best place to piggyback some of that transparency. So we'll work through that idea as we recommend some potential language for Sherry.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the timing of the vote, which is the last piece we have out there, I heard most people say that July would be okay, maybe not perfect, but okay. It would still set us, the goal is to have a policy in place for Kelly's predecessor, and probably a July vote would still accomplish that. And we're following our policy and policies in that we've had our conversation at a work group meeting now, so we don't need to do that again. All we need to do is like bring this up at a regular board meeting. So,
Yeah. Okay, seems like we have one edit to make, Chris. We'll make sure you get that set up for the vote.
So we have the edit, we have the memo, and then we have, you guys taking a deep dive into it as well as our policy committee, just to see if there's anything else you want to bring to our attention. We don't have another work group meeting in July, but it's, I think it could happen to a weekly update or something like that. Is July, I know Ananda, you expressed some concerns about July. I think everyone else seemed okay with it, and Kelly, you also expressed some concerns that seemed okay with July. Should we just plan on a July vote? June feels like it could be rushed, given that we don't have a memo yet. Ananda?
I could see that process, because we never had this type of conversation before.
Yeah.
I just want to get like a legal opinion. Like, I feel like we're now making, I mean, the administration can put our agenda for vote at any time, and we decide whether or not we want to postpone the vote or vote it against or vote forward. So I wanted to get some clarity of like is this conversation even within the bounds of what we should be discussing?
like, we're talking now about the agenda for whether or not we're voting in June or July. And I've never been part of this type of conversation before, so I'm a little bit uneasy. It would be good to get some opinion on that, but I think we're talking about something that's on the agenda tonight. We're just talking about when to take it up next. So I think we're okay, but Sherry, please let me know if that's wrong.
Chris, I will say, if I'm hearing from the majority of the board that this is something that works better in July than in June, particularly in response to the memo we've yet to receive, I'm comfortable, enacting the will of the board moving forward, and I don't know if we necessarily need to decide that before we've been provided with the memo, because we do have a little bit of time.
I think maybe we'll just leave this to you, Ollie, to get on the agenda.
And folks can definitely let me know if they're saying, if you all are saying, hey, I've gotten the memo, but I haven't had the time that we need, especially Savian and Chris, as you're deep diving this. I'm more than happy to kind of adjust the agenda in June, as long as we do so before we give notice around that agenda. And then even if it's on the agenda, we can have that conversation on the floor at the regular board meeting and decide that we need to, wait or pause until July.
Chris and Sabian, does that work for you? Okay. Chris, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I think once
absolutely.
we, get a chance to talk to Sherry and know how, timeline for the memo and that, we can take a look at that.
And Sherry and Ross, we understand that you have a lot going on right now, so obviously we wanna be reasonable with your time and your work as well.
If you want details, I can give you details, but I'm telling you, it's a lot.
All right, well, this has been a very productive discussion, both of this individual policy and of our bigger process and needs in terms of handling policy. Thank you to everyone for being part of it. Ollie, I will hand it over to you at this point to get it on the agenda at a regular board meeting when it feels appropriate and in a way that engages Chris and Sabian and also Ross and Sherry to make sure that timelines are realistic for people. So thank you very much. Kelly, thanks so much for your work on this and for bringing it to our attention. We want to make sure that our policies are workable for our staff. That's really important. So I really appreciate your raising this up for us. And we will see you on June 28th.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, Kelly.
Good night.
Take care, everyone. All right, so before we adjourn Operations Work Group, Ollie, I just want to check with you about, can we take a break before we go into closed session, and when do you want us back?
Let's take 5 minutes and reconvene at 8:17. We do have to adjourn this meeting.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I just wanted to check with you first before we did the motion. So, all right, can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hello.
All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Coaches kids learn to speak fast. You use the restroom here. Is that all right, Bob?
Y'all, I'm really hoping that we